co-founder of Ethereum,
every single president we've had,
Cardano,
from Washington,
Charles Hoskinson,
Barack
Obama, to
was
have you on
part
the channel.
of the
Thanks for
system in
joining
some
us.
way.
Adam,
Either
thank
they
you
were
so
a
much for having
general,
me on.
or they were a
Absolute
senator,
pleasure.
or a
Charles,
governor.
so much to
They were
discuss,
somehow
but before we
connected
get
to the
into
body
it, the
politic.
most important question
And then
from the crypto
suddenly
community:
you have this
are
person,
you
the
Satoshi?
first time in American history, who seems
No,
independent.
first
He's
off,
a
you'd have to think,
billionaire,
like, I would have
according
been
to
20
him,
years
who
old.
comes in and says, I'm so
I'm a
rich
bright
and I'm
guy,
so
but
out
I'm
there,
by no means
and I'm so
capable at 20
divorced
of
from everything.
conceiving
I'm the first time
a massive
ever
decentralized
you
ecosystem,
guys get a look
inventing
at what's
new
behind the
protocols,
curtain,
especially since
the
I
Wizard
didn't
of
study
Oz.
computer
You actually
science
get to see
professionally.
how
I
the
studied
whole swamp
mathematics, and
works.
they're a world
And
apart.
we together as
like pen and
outsiders
paper
are going to
that don't
drain
like
it.
code.
And you know what?
You know,
He could have
most
been
likely
that guy.
candidate for
But
Satoshi is probably
he had
Adam
to be
Back
prepared
and
to be humble.
I'd argue that if you
and
really are curious to
admit
find
that he was
Satoshi,
wrong,
you can
and
actually
he had to
make
be
a lot of
prepared to
progress
listen
with something
and
called code
rise
stellometry
to the occasion.
So stellometry
Instead, he empowered
is
his
a term
family.
for analyzing
He put Ivanka
writing,
in a prominent
and,
role,
usually
Jared
you
in
do
a
it for
prominent
handwriting,
role.
but
Some
you
of
can
the
actually
least
do it for
qualified,
least
code,
competent
and it
people
turns
to
out
major
that
positions of
programming,
power.
and
The
it was a
actual computer
revolving
code
door.
that you
He
write
brings in
is
General
much
Mattis,
like a fingerprint.
great
It's
general,
very
one of the
unique to
greatest
the
of all
individual
time.
and
He's
has
so brilliant.
very little to do
overrated.
with,
He's terrible.
other
whatever.
stuff. So
Rex
if you're really
Tillerson,
curious about who
greatest
Satoshi is,
businessman
you
ever,
probably could
CEO of
take all of the
ExxonMobil. He
original
knows how to
Bitcoin
lead.
source
He's going to
code,
shake up the
run it
State
through a
Department.
stylometric
He's
analysis,
a moron
and
and
compare
has
it to a
been
training
washed up.
set of all the open source
He
projects
turned on Mike
around that
Pence.
time period. And
4
5-10
years of loyally
before,
following him.
and
I
guarantee
follow
you'll
you, Mr.
probably
President.
narrow
I'll go
that
to hell
set
and
of
back for
candidates
you.
down to,
And he won't break the
a very
law. So
small
suddenly
set.
Mike
I'd
Pence
say
is
5
a
or 10
traitor and he's a
people that
bad
are
guy.
likely.
And then
there's also
so
some
what
facts
kind of a
and
leader does
circumstances
that?
about the
Where,
protocol
when it's all
itself,
just
like
self-indulgence,
as the scripting
and if you
language
don't
for
play into
Bitcoin
his fantasies and his
that was a very
desire
common
for power,
pedagogical language.
you stab
in the 1980s
the people
and
who won't indulge you in the back the minute
UK
they become
education system
inconvenient
for
to you.
undergraduates.
Rudy
So as
Giuliani
an
is the
example
latest one.
of,
Looks like his
programming
legal fees
language.
aren't going to be paid.
So
before
you'd
that was
say, okay,
Michael
the person
Cohen
is
probably
his
at
fixer
the time
lawyer.
of the creation of
Bitcoin
Bitcoin
in their 40s or 50s
years.
of
They've
this
probably
history
come from
and the
before him, his
cypherpunk
father.
movement. They
So it was
probably were
all a
educated
con.
in a UK style
what
system. So that
bothers
could be
me the most
Australia
about
or
it
the
is
or
that
England.
I see those
these
crowds,
types of
like
things.
the one in
And thank you.
Washington. I see those people.
Then
and
you can
those are good
look at your
people
set of
at the
candidates.
end
And
of
I'd
the
say
day.
the
They're
most likely
the
of
people
that
who
set
got
would
screwed
be
in life.
Adam Back. They're the
Well, I know
truckers.
that
They're the people
a lot of
working at
people
the
do actually want to
7-Elevens.
know
They're the people
who
who
it
are
is,
laid
but in the
off
same
because of the
spirit, I guess
consequences of
many people
globalism. They're the
don't want to
factory
intrude on
workers
the
whose factory
anonymity
went out of
of that.
business
Like,
and went to
there's a reason
Mexico
why
or
he
to
kept it
China.
to himself,
And
or
they
didn't want to go
have
public.
really
So
not gotten
in many
a fair
instances,
shake.
I asked the
Maybe
question
they
as
got
a
a
joke,
divorce in the
we do
in
wonder, but we
the
can sort of see after
child
the global
court
financial
was not
crisis
so
of
kind to them, and
2008.
their child
Bitcoin
support
brought the
payments are way
concept
too
of
high.
a
Maybe
distributed ledger.
a family
Then we
member
had
died of
Ethereum, which you
cancer,
worked on,
and
which
they
brought
weren't
the
able to pay
concept
for
of
that. And they have a
smart
lot of
contracts.
medical debt and
Moving on
other
to
things that they're
Cardano,
dealing with.
how does that build
And
upon
they
the
had
previous
hope
generation to move
for the
this
first
space
time
forward?
ever. Yeah, so every
They didn't
generation
think
you kind
Mitt
of learn
Romney
something.
worked for 'em.
And so for a
They
long time,
had hope
people were
with
chasing
Obama.
decentralized
Look
money.
what happened with
and we were
Occupy
all
Wall
looking for that
Street
smart
and
cow that
the
would
whole
open the gate,
Inquisition.
let us all
Nothing
out.
happened. They said
And,
we got screwed
Bitcoin
with
had
that
to be
guy.
it,
We
but
got
there
screwed
were a
with
lot
Bill
of
Clinton. We
commoners.
got
I mean,
screwed with
Bitcoin
George Bush. They've
started
been
in the
lied to their whole
1980s,
adult life.
and there were a
And
lot
then
of
suddenly
cypherpunk
this guy
ideas
comes
there.
in as a
And in the
complete
90s, there was
outsider, and he built
digication.
a
A lot of
relationship
great pioneering
with
work
them.
from Hal
And he
Finney and
convinced
David
them to their
Chaum.
bones
And then
that
in
they
the
were
early
finally going to
2000s,
get
you had
power.
work from
They were finally
people
going to
like
get
Nick Szabo
away
and so
out
forth. And
of
there
the
was
bad
kind of like this
position,
bit
and all
gold
the people
concept
that
that was
wronged them,
floating
all the
around.
evils
So
of their
the
life could
synthesis
somehow
of
be
all those
corrected.
concepts into
But like
Bitcoin
every
was just
dictator,
a miracle of
fascist
inspiration
or
and a very simple system.
carnival barker,
And for its
that
time,
demagogue that
great
promises
problem.
these things,
You
he
know,
couldn't
how do you
deliver.
create
So he had to
decentralized
create a
value
scapegoat
and
the
move
reason
that
why
around?
I can't give you
Like
the
emails.
crazy promises
The problem
I
is
promised
the minute
you is
that you
because of
validate
this
a
racial
concept,
group
just
or
like
this
the minute
enemy,
you create the
the
web
Mexicans,
browser,
the
people
Democrats,
complain about
the
it being
Muslims,
blind, deaf, and dumb.
the
And they say,
Chinese,
God,
this global
we want more
conspiracy against
functionality.
me.
So the minute
Go
you have the
listen
browser,
to
you're
QAnon.
searching for
He'll tell you it
JavaScript.
all.
You're searching for
And it got
some
crazier
language
and
that
crazier
will
and more
enable
far-fetched.
you
And
to
his
have
ego was so
richer
strong, he
experiences.
couldn't
And
even
then once you
admit
do
that
that,
he
you go from
lost the
static
election.
websites to Amazon and
And
Facebook and YouTube.
he had
right?
every financial
similarly,
incentive
the
to
minute
admit
that
it.
you have Bitcoin, you need
All he
smart
had to do
contracts.
was
You
just
need
ride out
Ethereum.
2 months
So we
and
created
be humble
Ethereum.
and let
And
Biden
then
take
the minute
power.
you have
And
Ethereum,
he could have started Trump
people
News
say,
Network,
wow, this is a great idea.
absorbed
We want to do
Newsmax,
this
competed
at
with
scale.
Fox News,
We want to do
made
this
billions
with
of dollars a
people
year, and
instead of
leveraged the
thousands
fact
of
that he
people.
still
And
had
a replicated
74 million
system can't
Republican
do that. So you
supporters
need new
to put his
protocols
kids
for
into
that.
power.
And then you say,
That's
wait a
all he
minute,
had to
the
do.
system
Just
has
shut
to
the
talk
hell
to
up
everything.
and
Could
let
you
the
imagine how
nation
terrible
transition
Wi-Fi would be
and
if
clean
it
up
was
your
connected to
legacy
the
and then
manufacturer?
walk away into the
So
sunset
your
and
some
make all
phone
this
can only
money.
talk
But he
to a
couldn't
Samsung
do it
router, or your
because
Apple
if he
phone can
lost
only
the
talk to an
election,
Apple
it's a
router. It
rejection
would be
of him.
untenable. The
And
whole
he
reason
can never
Wi-Fi works
admit
is
he
because it
lost.
works for
He
everybody,
can never
regardless
admit
of your
he's
device.
flawed.
There's some
He can
skepticism.
never admit he's
Well,
wrong.
analogously,
I
like
know
your
so many
value,
people
your
in the
identity,
intelligence
you'd
community,
like information
some people
to flow
who do the
between
presidential
8,000
daily
plus
briefing.
cryptocurrencies and
And
the thousands
I asked
of
them,
legacy systems.
what
And
is
then finally,
the daily
how do
briefing
you
like
govern a
with
system
Trump?
with millions of people
It's
and
like
no
3
centralized
pages
company?
long. It's got lots
We
of
don't
pictures,
do
and they
that
have to
very
mention
well
his name
as
in every
humans. We
damn
like to think,
paragraph to get his
we
attention.
can, but usually for Windows,
Every
you have a
normal president,
Microsoft.
30,
For
40 pages
Android,
long,
you have a
detailed
Google. For
information,
for
lots of
iPhone,
very
you have an
probing
Apple.
questions.
Well, what
Even
happens when you
Bush,
remove the Apple?
lots of
You
questions,
remove the Google,
followed
remove the
by
Microsoft. How do you make decisions?
get me
and
more
move
into
forward
this.
and stay
Let's look more into
competitive?
an actual
Bitcoin is a
concern and
miracle.
care.
It's also
It was
a failure.
there. Just what
It's
is
a
about
miracle
me?
that it
Me,
introduced this great
me.
concept. It's a
That's
failure
not a
in that
leader.
it can't
You know,
evolve.
and I think the
So it
presidency
knows it
should be
needs smart
held to an
contracts.
incredibly
That
high
system
standard. Because
knows
look at the
that it
men
would
who
be
had
get better
character
bringing more
beforehand.
sophisticated crypto.
Look at
and
what
enhance
Lincoln
a lot
endured.
of
Look
things
at
to
what
make it more
Washington
competitive.
endured. Look at the
with all these
sacrifices.
standards.
All
But
these
there's
people
no way
had
to
to
create
make in
enough
the horrible
consensus to be able
situations
to
that they were
evolve the
put in.
system. And then all of these
Kennedy,
different camps
with
fight each
the
other.
Cuban
So there's a
Missile
lack
Crisis,
of
we were
sustainability
literally a
and
depth
governance
charge
there.
or two away
Furthermore,
from a
there's a
nuclear
funding
war.
problem. There's a
Knowing
tragedy
that,
of the commons
and
problem.
enduring that,
We all agree
going
it's
through that, the
necessary
agony
infrastructure,
FDR went
but there's
through,
no
with
provisions
hundreds
made
of
to
thousands of
subsidize the
Americans
development.
dead in
So
a
what
world
ends up
war,
happening is you
trying
have
to figure out
patrons
how the
that
hell are
show
we going to
up,
put the world
and they
back
exert
together
enormous
after all of this.
influence
Harry
over the
Truman,
evolution
with
control of the
Oppenheimer and these
system.
other people
For
coming into
example,
the
the
White House saying,
blockchains and
"Mr.
the
President, the
DCI and
nuclear bomb
these
is
other
ready.
bodies
What do
and
we do
groups,
with it?"
whether they're
And
for-profit
he has
or
his
not
generals
for
sitting
profit.
there and saying,
And
"If
we
we
see
invade
already
Japan,
that
a
that's
million
happening in
people
the
are
web,
going to
where
die.
Google has
So do we
enormous
drop a
influence over
nuclear
web
weapon?
standards
Not
because
once, but
it's the golden
twice.
rule.
Being
He who
prepared
has
for
the gold
third
makes the
time
rules.
for
And then
Tokyo.
suddenly the
Until these
W3C
guys
is talking
surrender.
about injecting ads
And then still
into your
figuring out how to
browser
put
and
the
other
world
things
together
as a standard.
afterwards.
It's
The
like,
Marshall
whoa,
Plan. How
where
do
did
we
this come
rebuild
from? Well,
nations
Google kind of
we were
wanted it.
just at war
So
with and sell it?
these are the three
And then the
problems
people
that we
who
kind of
didn't
said we need to
occupy the
solve
office,
as
who
a
could
consequence
have
of the
occupied
success
the
of
office,
Ethereum and
but made
Bitcoin.
profound
And the problem
sacrifices and
is the problems
sacrificed their
grow up
political career
in
for it.
exponential
MacArthur is a great
complexity.
example of that.
As
Not
there's
exactly
a
a humble
combinatorial
guy,
explosion of things
but
that
he had
can
a
go wrong.
horrible
Satoshi
decision
didn't
he had to
create
make in
Bitcoin
Japan
as a simple
in
system
1945.
because
The American
he
people
couldn't come
didn't
up
get
with
Hitler.
a more
We were denied
sophisticated
that.
system.
So we
He
looked to the
created
Emperor
Bitcoin
of
as a
Japan
simple
and we
system
said,
because
well,
the
at least
more
we'll hang him.
complexity you introduce,
So
the more
everybody
that can go
expected
wrong.
MacArthur
For
to put this
example,
guy on
the minute
trial
you create
and
a
charge
rich
him for all
smart
the war
contract
crimes
language,
that
you
they
have a
didn't
DAO
happen.
hack. You have
And
a
then he
parity
has his
hack.
generals come
You
to
have
him
ring
and
of
say,
Geiger
MacArthur,
style
if we do
situations
that,
where you have
there will not be
malfeasant
peace in
smart
Japan for a
contracts that
century.
cause all kinds
There'll
of
be civil
chicanery and
war and
havoc.
chaos.
And
We
the
gotta
minute
let
that
the
your
guy
system
go.
grows, to
Even
many,
if you
many
have
users,
grievances,
you have
you
the
have to let him go.
problems
He
of
says, look,
scale.
90%,
And then you have to start introducing all of
91%
these
of the
really
American people
complex
want the emperor
layer
tried
2
and executed.
protocols
If
or
I let him
off-chain
go, my
infrastructure to
political
hold up
career
the
is
system
over.
and pretend like it's
And at the
decentralized when in
time, it
reality
was
it's not.
Eisenhower or
So
MacArthur,
that's the
and
big
MacArthur
challenge
was
for
the
us. Is
favored
Cardano
candidate.
is a
Everybody
significantly
knew that
more
one of the
advanced
five-star
product
generals in World War II was
protocol
going to become
than
president within
Ethereum.
10
And
years.
Ethereum is
So
significantly more
MacArthur was the
advanced than
favored candidate.
Bitcoin.
All he had to
And
do was do what the
dealing
American
with this
people wanted,
complexity
and
at
he'd be
times has
president
just
in
been
1948.
bewildering.
One of
That's
the
simple.
arguments I have
If he
on my
wanted it,
channel
it's
with
all his.
Cardano versus Ethereum
And then he's looking at
is
this decision.
the advantage of
Do I
Cardano,
take care of my
and
political
I seek your
career
opinion
and
on
my
this. So the advantage of
ambitions,
Cardano
or
versus
do
Ethereum
I
is
do
that
what's
Ethereum has
necessary
launched
for
quickly,
healing
they've
and
created a
ending the war
product,
and
and
moving
now
it
it's
on
almost like
and
they're
turning
trying to
Japan
clean up
into a
all
strong
the
ally?
issues that they have
And he
that
made the
Cardano
decision
is
to turn
addressing
Japan into a
before they're
strong ally.
launching.
That's
It's
character.
almost like the analogy that I
Doing the
give
right
on my
thing,
channel
even if
is
it
that
hurts you. I
Cardano
have
is coming
never
in,
in my
making sure
entire
that the
life
foundation is
seen
completely
anything
rock solid,
like
all the
Trump
plumbing's in
so
place,
bereft
all the
of
electrical
character.
lines are in, all the
Every
furnaces are in
moment in
before
his
they actually build the
existence
house.
where he
Where in
had an
contrast,
opportunity to
Ethereum
show that
sort
he
of
was
built
thinking
the
about
house
something
before trying to get all
other
those
than
foundations in
himself.
place, and now they've
He
got a bigger
couldn't do it. He
challenge
couldn't
with trying to
rise
clear
to the
that up.
occasion. He
Is that a
couldn't
fair
give it to
analogy?
somebody.
And if
He
not,
couldn't help
why
them
is
out.
Cardano
Any
going
act
to
of
be, in your
charity
opinion,
was
so much more
always
successful
connected
than
to
Ethereum?
some
So
gain
one
for
of the things
himself.
about
Look,
wisdom
I'm such a
is
great
that
guy.
you tend to
I
invent
created
the
a
safety
foundation.
belt
Then there's
after
at
you
the end of the
invent
rainbow,
the
his
car.
kids were making
And
money.
you don't
or
just
somebody in
proactively
his
say, hey,
orbit
it's a
was
good idea to
making
put a
money, and
safety
so
belt in.
forth.
What happens is you get
You
in a car
know,
accident,
and
you go through the windshield.
I just
You're like,
I
boy, we
couldn't
should do
believe
something
when he
about
became
that.
president. But I had
So
hope.
Ethereum and
I had
Bitcoin
hope
were
that
much
he would
smaller
have a
systems in a
spiritual
much
awakening
smaller economy
and realize
when they
that
came out.
he
So there was
had
no
a
value
real
at risk.
chance
We raised
for the
$18
first
million
time in a long
for
time in
Ethereum. We were like,
America.
wow,
To actually
if we
get
can
the
get to
divisions to
$100
go
million
away, he could have built an
cryptocurrency and
infrastructure
get, you know, a
program
few
that was
thousand people
bipartisan
building cool
and
stuff,
rebuilt
it's
America's
successful.
infrastructure.
Huzzah.
He could have finally
And
done
now
a
it's a
healthcare
$130
deal
billion
that the Republicans and
ecosystem.
Democrats couldn't because
So
he was a
there's a
bipartisan guy. He was a
fundamental
Democrat for
difference
so
between
long.
where it
None of
began
these
to
things
where it's
happened.
at.
What killed his
And
healthcare
similarly,
plan?
when you build the
His
car
hatred
or
of
the
John
first
McCain.
airplane, you're not thinking at
The
all
whole
about
reason they
safety.
couldn't
You're
even
not
do a
thinking at all
healthcare plan
about these
was he's so
success
pissed off John
factors
McCain
come,
that John
the
McCain's like,
consequences
I'm
of
just
success
not going to
that
vote
come.
for it. I'm
Well,
dying of
if you
brain
build a car
cancer.
today,
Fuck this
you don't
guy.
have the
I don't give a
ability
shit about
to
my
just
party.
pretend like history
Screw
doesn't
you.
exist. So you have to do things
Thumbs
differently.
down. Fuck
So
you, Trump.
the Teslas, for
That was
example, they had to adhere
100%
to
Donald
all the
Trump.
safety
And then what
standards
does he
that
do?
Ford and GM,
Let's all
these other
hate
things,
John McCain
while
and kill
also
his legacy
innovating and
and
bringing
try to
new
kick
things
his
to market.
wife and his
So
daughter.
we
out of
recognized
the
very early
Republican
on that
Party
there
is
were a lot of
retribution
issues with
for his vote
consensus
against
design,
my
especially if you
agenda.
plan on
And
scaling.
he has no agenda. What is
with
his
proof of
healthcare
work
plan?
in,
What is his
in the way
principle?
that
He has no
Bitcoin
depth
and
on
Ethereum
policy.
were using it. So we needed
It's
a
morally
fundamentally
bankrupt.
different way of doing
Then he turns on
consensus,
Mitch
and even
McConnell.
Vitalik agrees with that. Which is
I mean, it's
why
like he just
S2
no
exists,
level
and they're
of
trying to clean this
depravity.
stuff
This
up.
man won't
But we
go
went
to.
beyond that and said the
I'm
entire
sorry.
development
I'm just
paradigm of how
just
people build dApps,
drained and
they write
angry.
smart contracts,
the
this
COVID
type of
response
stuff
was the
it
final
has to
straw
be
for me.
rethought from a very first
You know,
principles basis, because it was
there were
never
so
built
many
in a way
things.
for
Look at Thailand,
sustainability. It was never
Taiwan.
built in a way for
7
resource
people
predictability.
died
Because if
in
I'm an
Taiwan.
application builder,
20
I'd like to
million
have
people live
predictable
in that
application
country.
costs.
Hyper urbanized.
Could you imagine a web host who's like,
we could?
well,
They had
maybe I'll
17
charge
years
you
to prepare it.
$500
The U.S.
today for your
government had
app,
been
and then
talking
tomorrow
about
maybe it'll be
pandemics since
$5,000.
George Bush.
And then the next day it'll be $5.
They had a whole
You're-
game
It's
plan.
like, what
for
kind
it.
of drugs are you
Everybody
on?
ignored
This
it.
is not a business.
And the very
I
people
need to
that
have
could have
predictable
done
cost
something
if I'm going to be
were
able
not
to have a
put to
predictable
power.
application.
Instead, it was
or
just
else
all politics
nothing's
from the
worked.
very beginning.
Well, Ethereum was never built for
Vaccine
that.
warp
It was
speed
built
was
as an
super
experiment
political.
that kind of
It was
grew
super
into
political
a
on the
successful
distribution
project,
of
and
PPE.
now
It was super
trying to
political with the
build
governors.
a
We had
safer
50
car.
different pandemic
And this is why
responses.
first mover advantage
Every one
in
of them
technology
crazy.
in many cases
Lockdown in
is actually a
Colorado. I
historic
want to go get lunch. I
disadvantage.
drive up to
The first
Wyoming.
web browser was
It takes an
Mosaic,
hour.
and it was a
How the
for its
hell did
time
that stop the
revolutionary,
spread? If the restaurants
but
are
really
open on one
didn't
side,
do
the other
much
side.
in the
Friend who
long
lived in
stream
Lake
of things.
Tahoe.
Even Netscape
You
failed,
crossed the
and even
border of
Internet
Lake
Explorer
Tahoe
failed,
from
and now we're in the
California to
Chrome
Nevada.
age, and
You
maybe
literally walk.
Brave will
The
dethrone
restaurant
them.
on
Who
one
knows?
side is under a
Well,
brutal
similarly, search
lockdown, and
engines,
no one can even
like
go. On
Google,
the
I
other
think, was
side,
the
they're like
17th
not even wearing
search engine to
masks,
be
just hanging out on the
commercialized.
patio.
It's
It's
so there were a
literally
lot of
100
failures
feet.
before Google.
This is just
There
the
was a monopoly
craziest,
before Google.
craziest
Yahoo had a
national
huge
response.
chunk
And
of
who
the
paid?
market
The
that the
American
very
people
powerful
paid.
MySpace
We printed
had a
$6
huge
trillion.
chunk of the market before
All these
Facebook
restaurants
came.
went out of
and
business.
now Facebook is starting
You know,
to
and
deal with
all
all
these
these
people
emergent
just got
aliens
hopeless
that
and
are
hurt. And
new
that
social
same group
networks
of
that are
people,
scraping away
he
at
then
it.
manipulated
So
to go
usually
ahead
what
and get
happens when you're
so
the first
angry
mover is
at all
you
of their
get a lot of
misfortunes and convince
population,
them
but
that
it's
the election of
unstable,
the opposing
and they're very
political party is the
frustrated
end of
with that
America,
platform.
and we're
And
all
you're
going to
covered with
go,
lots
and
of
the New World
scars and
Order is in
legacy
charge, and
design
China's
decisions
in
and other
charge,
such things, and
all of these
as
other
a
things have
consequence,
happened.
you can't.
My
It's like
God,
holding sand
it was
in your
just
hand. It
pathetic.
slips
I
through your
remember
fingers,
watching
and
his
it's
White
really,
House
really
press
hard to keep
conferences,
your lead.
and then all these other
and the rest of
competitors
these guys,
come and
they
we've
have
done
the
a great
benefit of
job.
hindsight,
Nobody could have
so
done
they
a
don't
great
make the same
job.
mistakes you've made,
We did
and
the
they
best
also
job.
know
The
where they need to
governors are
innovate.
calling me,
And because
telling
they
me
don't
how
have to
great
deal
my job
with
is.
the
Look at this
legacy
quote
concerns
from
you have, they can
this
move
guy.
faster than
Oh
you.
my God!
And as a
Imagine how much
consequence, they get
solace
more
that would
features
give
have come to
someone.
market before.
Yeah,
So, for example,
the general
Ethereum
just
had
told
been
me he did a
working on
great
proof of
job.
stake
Yeah, but we
a
just
year
lost half
longer
of
than
our
we had
battalion
with Casper.
because we were ambushed.
Despite
but the
that, we
general
were
told
first
me
to
that we
market
did a great
with
job.
our
He
proof of
just
stake
got a
protocol,
call from
and
the
they
president.
probably
He said,
won't have
no
theirs
one
fully
would do a
turned on
better
until
job than that general.
2022.
Pathetic.
And that's just completely
It's
a
just
consequence
pathetic.
of
It was
process and
an
scale
abdication
and
of
dealing
leadership
with
and
their
responsibility at a
legacy
time when
concerns.
we could
I'm
have
wondering
actually set
if you're
politics
comfortable
aside
speaking to
and
us
done
about
things
it.
different.
Do you still
It
speak to
just
Vitalik,
didn't happen.
and why
And
did
that
you leave?
was,
Why did you two
the
break
greatest
up, per
indictment
se?
of his legacy.
Well, I don't
and
imagine
the
Vitalik
final
has a
nail in
super
the
high
coffin
opinion
for
of
it.
me.
He will go down in
You know,
history as one of
and
the
it
worst
is what it
presidents.
is. The reality
Not the worst,
is that
probably
we
Andrew
have
Johnson was
very
just
big
as bad, if not
philosophical
worse, but definitely one of the worst
disagreements about
presidents
how
in
things
the
ought to
20th
run.
and 21st century.
When
When I was there, I said, look,
Are you
for
worried
taking
or
other people's
feeling
money, we
confident
have to
about
put that
Biden?
money into a structure.
I mean,
that
he's got
creates
dementia.
accountability.
He's 78 years old.
Furthermore,
The
we have to
guy's
put
golden
clearly in
handcuffs on the
cognitive
founders
decline.
and
My
keep them loyal
grandfather
to the
died of
project, 'cause
Alzheimer's.
there's too
My
many of them.
grandmother
There's
died
8
of dementia.
founders.
My other
And if
grandmother
they're
had
not
Lewy
locked
body
into
disease.
something,
I'm very
then what's
familiar
going to happen
with
is
the
they're all going to
symptoms
run
of
away and
dementia
create their own
watching
ventures,
them gradually
which is what
fade.
they did.
It's incredibly
Anthony
clear to
did
me that while he
Decentralization,
has
Gavin did
some
Polkadot
acumen,
and Parity.
he's not
I did
operating on a full
Cardano.
battery. You know,
And the problem
they
is you
there's
cannot
7
put
of the
a
8 are gone.
78-year-old
And
guy
furthermore,
showing
the
early
incentives
onset
were
as
set up
showing
that
signs of
we got
dementia
paid
into
up
the most
front
powerful
with a
job in
founder
the world,
reward, which I
where you
didn't
have to
take
be
the
with
other
it
7
24
did.
hours a day. I mean, look at Obama.
And comes in young,
Basically,
happy black guy,
if the
comes out
project with
makes
white
successful,
hair.
hallelujah. If it
I mean,
fails,
it's like he
hallelujah.
aged so
But you've already
much
got
in
your
8
maximum
years, and
reward up front,
he's in
whereas
great
an
shape.
equity
He
finance
eats really
model,
well. He
you have to build
exercises
value
every day.
over time.
I
You
don't
have
think
a venture
Biden is going to
capital arm
survive his
keeping you
term, and even
accountable.
if he does,
So the first there was a
he's gonna be a
fundamental
shell of
disagreement
himself by
about
the time
business
he'll be
strategy
83, I
and
think, by the time
execution
his,
vision. And I
his
felt
term ends.
a
It's
for-profit
crazy.
model with VC
So
money
I
to
don't-
build the
I
protocol
don't
made
think
a lot
Biden
more sense.
himself is
And then when the
capable of
protocol
doing the
was
job.
done,
The
spin
good
it out
news
and
is
have
he's
a
been a
governing
swamp creature
foundation
for
run
so
it
long that he kind of
would be
knows
probably
like
a much better
all these
approach.
competent people.
That's one
and
dimension. The
it's
other
clear that
dimension is
he's
your
putting into
interpersonal
power
reasons.
a lot of people that are
we
kind of
have for 6
self-motivated.
months been living like
and so
hippies.
this
In
administration
the
he's
Switzerland house,
constructing is
and
relatively
he was
moderate.
traveling around the
And I think
world,
that
and
they can get
communication
us
was very
through,
siloed.
kind of like
and
Gerald Ford
paranoia
did
and fear
the
started
next few
building up. And there's
years.
like
But
three
what's going
books
to happen
now.
is we're going to have a
great
written about
political
this, and
reset
those
in
books
2022,
headed
they
2024
paint a portrait.
had Trump not
there was a
done what
bunch
he
of
did,
very
I would
brilliant
put every
people
dollar
that got
down
2
that
doses of
Republicans
brains and
would
half
never
a
take
dose
the
of
House and
social
Congress.
skills, myself
Given that he's done what
included.
he's done,
And
he's still
when you put them
relevant
into
in
a
the party,
high
and it's
stress
fractured.
hippie-like
You have
situation,
Republicans and
it
Whigs.
breeds a lot
It's
of
just crazy.
conspiracy theories and fear and
I don't know
these
what's
types
gonna
of things.
happen
And
in
frankly, there was
2022,
just
but
too
I
many
think what
founders.
probably will occur
So
is
at
the
some
same thing that
point,
happened in
you have to
1966,
and there was
with Richard
really
Nixon.
two
So
different
everybody thought
paths
Nixon was
that
dead.
Tiktaalik could
You know,
choose. He was
lost
sitting in the
governor
middle.
election
He
in
could pick the
1962
business
after he
side,
lost the
which is what I
presidential
was
election.
advocating,
Kennedy
and
in
Anthony
1960,
Diorio and Joe
and then
Lubin were advocating.
1964,
Or
we
he
had
could pick
Barry
the
Goldwater
tech,
crypto
their
anarchy,
party got
not-for-profit,
decimated, and then the Republicans were kind
egalitarian
of in
and
the
hinterlands.
meritocratic
What
open
Nixon
source
did is he
world,
put the whole
which is
party
what
back
Gavin
together
and
in
Jeff
1966
were pushing.
As a consequence, it made him
Ultimately, our
relevant again,
side
and then he
lost,
ran
and
in
Mr.
68,
Tweet left, and
he
I
was able
left
to
at the
outmaneuver
same time, and then
Nixon,
shortly
Rockefeller,
thereafter,
and
Anthony
George
left, and
Rothman
then
win the
Joe went on
nomination.
to do
Robert
Consensus and
Kennedy got
monetize
shot,
a
so he
whole
got to
different
run against
area.
a weaker candidate.
And then obviously the tech
and he became
people,
president.
it was Lord of the Flies.
So I
They
think
ate
that
themselves.
something
They
similar,
nearly spent
without
all the
the death
ICO
of
money.
Kennedy, is
They
probably going
launched
to
Ethereum.
happen.
I think they had less than $500 million in treasury of the original
put the
18
Republican
million
Party
that they
back
ran. They got
together,
very lucky,
and that person will
Ethereum
become
became
the heir
very
apparent
apparent quickly
in 2024
it allowed them to replenish
for
the
the
treasury.
nomination.
Now
The
it's a
Democrats
success,
will likely
but just like
nominate,
Tesla in
Kamala
2008,
Harris
they're
to run
damn
in
near
2024. I don't
bankrupt.
think Biden is going to
So
run.
and the problem is
hindsight,
politically
could we have found a
fractured
more
and
amicable
divided,
way,
and the
or could I have done
Democrats are
things
just
very
going
different?
for blood.
Of course.
I mean,
Trump
at the
is
time I was
gone. Why are they
25,
impeaching
26
him?
years old.
It's almost
It was
like
the first
I
time
call
I've
it
ever
the
done
cadaver
anything at a
synod.
scale like
It was
that.
a 9th century
There's a reason I
trial
became a
that the
mathematician and not an
Catholic Church
MBA.
put on
You know,
to
I
put a
I don't have
former
I don't
pope
have
on
those
trial.
native skills.
So they
It took
exhumed
me
a body,
about a decade
a corpse
to slowly
that was 7
aggregate and
months
learn how to lead a
dead,
company,
and they put the
and
corpse on
actually be
trial in the
accountable
9th
to a
century,
company and
and
run a
it's like,
software
what are you
project and run a
doing? I mean, this
science
guy's
project. And
gone.
you know,
He's
my
going to
work
be under
stands for
criminal
itself.
investigation,
With IOHK,
dozen
we've
plus
published
lawsuits.
92
He's going to be
papers.
trying to pay his bills.
I
and
think over 10,000 citations.
there's no way
I mean,
he's
an
gonna run in
academic career
2024. Let the guy go.
somebody's been around for 40 years or 50 years. We
let
did
off
all
it
of that
and focus
just
on the
a
future.
4-year
So
period.
instead of talking
From when
about
we
the
bootstrapped our
nomination of
scientists to
Biden's
actually getting
cabinet
serious about
and how the
paper
hell are we going
production.
to put America
And
back
then we
together,
built an
they're
engineering
talking about
company
impeaching a
that
president,
not only
and the
can
Republican
deliver a
Party's
product
not
as
going to
complex
remove
as
him.
Cardano to market,
So,
but do it in a very
we'll
exotic
go through another
programming
impeachment
language.
trial,
Haskell, find
and then
talent
the
there,
Republicans who
and then
didn't vote,
actually
the
go in
media
and
is going to
prove
go
Haskell the
crazy, and they're
programming
going to
language
viciously
itself,
attack
compile it to
all those
JavaScript
Republicans,
and
and they'll just make
WebAssembly
people
and so forth.
angrier.
So
and
I have 6
angrier
years
and
of
more
history
divided.
at IOHK,
I thought they
and I
were
have 6
coming.
months of history at
They
Ethereum.
could.
What's so
It
disheartening is that
absolutely
Ethereum
could,
is
you know,
the
because
big project. And Cardano
look
isn't
at
quite
America
there
in the
yet. So Ethereum is what
1850s and
everybody
the
knows me
abolitionist
for.
movement,
And
how
so
those
they only had
disagreements
6
were
months of
percolating
data
and
where I had
percolating,
limited
and there
ability to
wasn't an
influence and control
acknowledgement
things.
that there
And
was
I was just
legitimacy
one
to certain
brick in the
arguments.
wall
And as a
amongst
consequence,
many.
people got more
And then at
divided,
IOG,
and they got
I've been the
angrier
CEO,
with
the
each
big
other.
guy.
And the
So
problem
I've
is that
had the
Trump
ability at
convinced
my
half of
company
America
to demonstrate
that the election was
what a vision
stolen.
would look
So
like.
now they
And
think
a lot of
voting
people often
doesn't
ask,
matter.
well, what
So
would
they
have
can't
happened
express
with
themselves through a
Ethereum
democratic
had
process. And now they're
you
being
stayed? It's like we've already run that
by
experiment. It
stupid
would look a
liberals
lot
in
like
Silicon
Cardano.
Valley.
So
now they have
how
no
we
place
built
to vent.
Cardano, the approach we took,
So their
that's
conspiracies
exactly
are being
what Ethereum
validated.
would look like.
They think the New
And
World Order is
similarly, they ask,
taking
well, what
over
would have
America
happened
and
if Ethereum had
deplatforming
Gavin
them and
Wood
introducing
had more say?
evil things.
Well, we already
so
ran
now
that
they're being
experiment. We have
deplatformed.
Polkadot.
So everything that
And
the
that's
Alex
exactly what
Joneses of the
Ethereum
world
would
were
look
telling
like.
them
It
was
would look a
going
lot
to
more
happen
like
is happening
Polkadot
to
and
them.
less like F2.
So of
and
course
forth.
they're going to start.
So in
going
many
to
ways, it was the
violence.
best thing that ever happened.
What
to
other
me. It
recourse
allowed
do they
all of us,
have? They
Gavin,
can't vote their way
myself,
out of it. They
Vitalik,
can't
to
talk
be
their
our
way
own
out of it.
guys
They
and
don't
to
trust
pursue our
the
own
other
visions
party,
and build our
and
own
the other
communities.
party is calling
And I
all
think
of the
the
Nazis and
cryptocurrency
white
space is much
supremacists and evil
richer
people.
as a
And if
consequence
they don't
because
fall
all
in
the
line
things we've
with their
done are open source.
political ideology, they're
love us or
horrible
hate
human
us,
beings, and they
the
should
ideas
be
are percolating and being
deplatformed and
shared.
isolated.
We learn from them,
Woke
they learn
cult
from
has
us,
gotten so
and
bad.
ultimately
They're
the
telling
communities all
kids are
benefit
telling their
in that
grandparents,
respect.
"Sorry, Grandpa,
I'm
I
glad you
can't
mentioned the
associate with you
community because
anymore."
a big mission for
I'm
me is
sorry,
sometimes
Dad,
when
I
there's,
can't talk to
let's
you
face
anymore
it, sometimes there's
you're
some
just
serious
a
conflict within the
Nazi.
crypto community
You
saying
voted
this
for
coin's
Trump.
better or that
I
coin's
can never
better.
talk
And
to you
the
again.
message that I
What
try
the
to put
hell
forward is, well,
kind
we all
of
progress
political
forward. So if one
philosophy
coin's sort of going up and
makes
another coin's
people
going up, not as
exile their
fast,
family
the
members?
entire crypto
Cults
community
do
is
that.
progressing because in the
You
bigger
know,
picture,
we don't do
I
that
find
to
in
a
my
free
world, I'm
society
trying
where
to sell
people are allowed to
crypto as a
disagree.
concept
So
to
they're
those who are
doing
not
that.
in the
The
crypto
other side is
space
getting
at all.
radicalized
And then within the
angry,
crypto
and they
community,
think
you have
violence
this
is their only
in-house
recourse,
fighting.
and they
When you
can't
mentioned
discern fact
Gavin
from
and
fiction
Polkadot,
anymore.
we now
and they've
have
become
the three
part of
big
this
runners,
QAnon
arguably.
cult.
Polkadot,
So
Ethereum, and
absolutely,
Cardano.
violence
Is there
going
the
to happen
space for
unless you
these
have a
three
leader talk
to
your
operate
country
together
out of
or
it.
in parallel,
And
if you
lucky
will?
for us, in the
Or
1960s
will there
and
only be one
1970s,
winner
we
in
had
this
leaders
smart
who were
contract
capable of
space? Will
finding
there
a way
only
to
be
pulling us back
Cardano
from the
or
brink,
Polkadot or
where
Ethereum?
society
Or
was
will they all
dissolving.
coexist?
It was the same in the 1930s.
Well, I've been in the space long enough to
radical
watch the
communism
top 10 on
flowing throughout
CoinMarketCap
Russia.
change
You had
a lot.
fascism flowing throughout
I
Europe.
remember
We had the
Feathercoin
Great
and
Depression in
Peercoin
America,
and Freightcoin
and a lot of people were saying,
Namecoin. These
maybe
days,
this whole
stuff
democracy
changes. The only
republic
constant
thing is not the
change.
best government.
So,
Maybe we should be
who knows?
communists.
If it's Polkadot,
there are over 1 million
Ethereum,
members of the
Cardano,
American Communist
it does
Party.
look like
there were
we're
over
heading
1
to a
million
Mexican
members of the American
standoff,
Nazi
and,
Party.
it's going to be a good,
in
the
the
bad, the ugly
1930s.
type
And it
of
was
a deal.
only through great
And we don't know
leadership
which one's wearing a
we were
poncho.
able to keep it together
But,
and prevent us.
we'll find out what happens.
So you
The
get
market will
close to
decide
these
that.
things
But I think we have the
when
wrong
you recognize
mentality
the
when
signs
we look
and
at things in a
symptoms of it.
sub-zero way.
And
at the
you
end
have
of the day,
to
we have to
diffuse
say,
that bomb, and you
are
don't
we
do it
solving the
by
problems
putting
we
people
set
in a
out to
corner and
solve?
calling them
And there's two
Nazis
sets of them.
and
One are
attacking them
conceptual,
and
and then the
half
other
the
problems are
country is
actionable.
irredeemable
So the
and
conceptual
deplorable.
problems are
You do it with
convincing people
empathy.
that you can run
You do it
governance, you can
by
run
apologizing
systems
and
in an
admitting your own
fundamentally different way.
failures and flaws.
Money is a
Taking
great
a step
example of
back
that.
from
We
the
say,
brain
okay,
and
two
saying,
options. You can have
guys, we
private
can
money
all agree
or public money.
that
You
if
either have
we
a central
don't
bank
agree,
that a government
it's all going to
controls
come to
or
an
a
end.
bank
So
issues
let's
a
find
currency.
a way to
Both
find
of these have
something
screwed the
we can
cookie.
agree
There's
to.
been over
And then
100
build
plus
from
years
there.
of history and
And maybe
central
it's the
modern central
coronavirus
banking
response.
and
We can
private
all agree
banking.
that
We've
maybe
seen all the way
if we
back
get
to
out of
Rothschilds and
this
their gold
pandemic
certificates. In
and
all
we get our
cases,
lives
they
back to
just
normal,
don't
that's a
work
good
out
thing
well.
for America.
Last
So
year
let's
we
just
printed
focus on
$6 trillion
that. Let's put everything
of money
else on
out
hold.
of thin
The
air
woke
to
cult,
pay for stuff.
the
And they have
racial
the
justice
audacity
and
to say you
social
still have to pay
justice stuff
taxes.
and the
Why?
economic
If you're telling
justice,
me you
the
can print $6
AOC
trillion
insanity,
and
let's put all
it's
of that
not
on
going to have
hold.
inflation,
Green New
why
Deal
don't you just
on
do
hold
that
and
every
these
year
other
and pay for
Let's
everything?
just
Why
do
not
this
just
pandemic
helicopter
and get us
money and
out of it.
monetary theory?
And let's just
See,
focus on that.
that's
Okay?
the
Then
logical
once we're out of it, we
inconsistency and the
built some common
temptation
ground and we
of
have
the
a
printing
common
press.
accomplishment
And in
that was
private money, look at
bipartisan.
Tether
And America
or these
came
other things.
together.
There's a lot of
And because
allegations
they came
floating
together
around
on
that.
that,
Maybe
it's
they're
proof
a
we can come
fractional
together
reserve.
on
And
other
even if they're
things.
not,
And then let's look
it's
for the next
real
thing we
tempting
can come together
to
on.
be a private
Our
business and sit
infrastructure
on
is crumbling
$25 billion
in America. It
of
hasn't been
cash
rebuilt in
and be like, well,
40 years.
nobody will really
Let's
know
go do
if I
that
take a little bit
and bring
maybe
America
invest it in
together
this
for that.
or do it
And then
in
we can
that
all
or
agree our
something like
healthcare
this. What the
system is
Rothschilds
not
did with
working.
their
So
gold
let's all come
certificates. They
together
say, hey,
on that.
people aren't
Great
redeeming
leader
these
can do that
at the
and
rate
can
of
bring people together for
issuance,
these
so
type of
we
things.
could
I
go
don't think
fractional
Biden
and
has
nobody
that
would even
ability
notice
'cause
and look
his
how much
brain is
money we
gone.
would make from that.
And I don't think Harris is a very good VP.
So
she
when you
sure
have
as
those
hell's not
types of
gonna do that. So
situations
somebody
occur,
has to in his administration.
maybe
do
it's
it
better to have a
and
third
lead us
option.
out of it. I hope
And that's
to
what
God
Bitcoin
for
basically
the
did.
sake
It
of
said,
America,
this is a
we can
deflationary
find a way
money
to do
system,
that.
value system. It's
And
like
I
a
have to
proto
be
commodity.
optimistic.
It's
I
like
really
digital
do.
gold that allows you to build
'Cause
money.
every time in
And
human
it's
history,
not
when
run
we've
by a
looked at the
government.
brink,
It's not run by a bank.
whether it be
It's
during the
something
Cuban Missile
new.
Crisis
So
or
that's
at
the conceptual
during the
side
80s
of
when there was a
cryptocurrencies.
Russian
And
colonel
there's
who
all
decided
kinds of
not to launch
concepts.
the nuclear
Voting
weapons from the
property
software
rights,
bug.
identity.
We
Making
found a way to get
decisions
back
in a
from the brink.
transnational
And
way.
I'm not going to be so
And every
cynical
time you
to think that
demonstrate
people
a
can't
killer
do that.
use
It's
case
no
like
one's
that,
best interest
then
to push
everybody
us to
can
a civil
point to it
war.
and say, I
The
know
world
that
is
works.
watching, my friend,
And that
because
becomes a
whatever
permanent
happens in
social
America,
building
it
block
affects the whole
that you
world.
can use for
Certainly
business.
with our military
It's
alliance
almost like
between
when
the
you're
Australian
successful, they say, I want to be the
and,
Uber
US
of
government.
X.
Wherever you
Tesla
go,
of
we
Y,
follow,
right?
noting that
There's
you
this
do have the biggest
concept that the
economy and the
business
biggest
model
military.
works, and
We
we
eagerly
want to
watch what
emulate
will
or
happen on
replicate
Thursday
this kind
with the
of idea.
inauguration.
Then
We
the
hope a
actual
peaceful
is
transition.
doing stuff.
We hope we have some type of
and so
stability in the
success
world.
for
And
me in the space is saying,
I do
did
hope
we
we
make
can
a
unify
difference?
on
How did
whatever
we
it is,
choose to
whichever
spend our
project we're
lives?
working on, whether it's
So I
COVID,
look at the world
infrastructure,
system,
world
and I
peace,
did a
Green
TED
New
Talk
Deal,
back in
whatever it
2014.
is.
I just said the
We
same
need
thing
to
over
slow
and
down,
over and
come
over
together,
again.
and drop the
And I'll
hate. We
keep
certainly see a
saying it.
rise of
Maybe one
those
day it'll happen.
otherwise
We live
democratic
in two
nations
worlds.
pushing for
We live in
communism.
the developed
Because as you
world and
said,
the
they're fed up with
developing
the
world.
left
And the
and the right.
developing
And
world,
let's
they're
just become one
unbanked for the
communist
most part.
nation.
And
communism
despite the fact
history
that they're
shows it
just as
never
smart
works.
as us, they
It
work
never,
harder
ever
than we
works.
do.
Yeah, there's a
And
lot
they're
of
just as
graveyards
human
that
as you
will
and
agree
me.
with you.
They are shafted because their
Hey, thank you
systems
so
are
much for
terrible.
this interview.
They
Yeah,
live in
Charles,
capital
great
controls
conversation.
and
I
corrupt
certainly
governments,
didn't
and
expect
they
to
live
go
in
this
areas
long,
where
but I'm
there's
very
not good
grateful
rule
that
of
it
law,
did. And I
and
feel like
they
I
don't
talked to you
have
for hours.
stable
But
currencies.
I've noticed it
and
go
as a
dark in the
consequence,
background
no
where
real
you
good
are.
banking
And we've been talking
infrastructure, no
about
good
sleep
risk
and
management
everything.
infrastructure,
Just
and
to
so
close off
forth.
for those
So they
of
can't
you who
build
haven't
wealth.
met me. I'm Adam Stokes. Check
of
out the
no
links
fault of
below.
their own. They lost
And
the
for you, Charles,
geographic
anything you'd
lottery.
like
They
to
were just
plug for the
unlucky.
viewers out there just before we close
So
off?
the point of
No,
our
no,
technology
if they're still with us,
is to
thank
take
you
a
for your
step back and
patience
say,
and
why don't we just
this
give them a
wild
new
journey
system?
that we've all
We
been on
talk
together.
about
It's
DeFi. Who's
been
going
a
to be
truly
using
remarkable
DeFi?
experience. And
The
I'd just like to
25-year-old
close by
yield
saying
farming
that I
kid
think our
in
best
New
days are
Jersey
still
living in
ahead
his
of us.
mom and dad's
And I
basement?
honestly do believe
Or
we,
is it going to be
no
the
matter
farmer
what
in
the challenge
Ethiopia
may
that's
be,
trying
we're
to get a
humans. We can
fertilizer
rise to the
voucher
occasion.
and can
while we're
actually, if he
capable of
gets
great
it,
evil,
afford to
we're
repay
also
you
capable of
a
great good.
15%
And
interest
so
rate?
it costs you nothing to be
It's
an
going to be the
optimist.
farmer.
And
You see,
some
and
people
that's
say, well, no, I got to
what
be
gets me
pessimistic because
up
that's
in the
realism.
morning. And I don't really
It
care
is what
if
you
that
make of it.
infrastructure runs on
And we've been in
Polkadot
worse places
or
before.
Ethereum or
536
Bitcoin.
was a pretty
The reason I
nasty
built
year to put up.
Cardano was that I
So
looked
I
at all
think
the
no matter what
infrastructure. I
happens,
looked at
we'll
their
find a way to
roadmap,
get
and I
out of it.
realized
So thanks
they're
you all
trying
for
to chase the
listening. And
wrong
Adam, this was a
markets.
hell of a
They're
lot of
dealing
fun.
in the
Cheers.
wrong ponds.
Thank you so much,
And they're
Charles.
not going
Cardano
to
or ADA
really
currently at
proactively
37
go to
US
that part of
cents,
the world
up
and help them out.
0.04%.
So
I
if
think
we
after
built
this, I might go
Cardano the
throw
right
another
way, it would be
$1,000
built
on
in a
ADA.
way that
Thank
would
you
be
so much, Charles. I
maximally
really appreciate
beneficial
it.
to as
Cheers.
many
Thank you
people
so
as
much.
possible. So yes, the IBMs can use us, and the Microsofts can use us, and the GMs can use us, and we can do supply chain and all of these other things. Sure, But
G'day
that's not
viewers,
the
I'm Adam
point. What
Stokes.
I'm going to
Welcome
do is
back onto
wake
the
up
channel
and
where we're
direct our
joined
commercial
by
effort, my
mathematician,
company's commercial
co-founder
efforts
of
to
Ethereum,
Ethiopia
and
and to
founder
country of Georgia and to
Cardano,
Southeast Asia and to
Charles
Mongolia.
Hoskinson. An
But it's an
absolute
open
honor to have you on
protocol.
the channel.
So
Thanks for
as we
joining
do
us.
that,
Adam, thank you so
everybody
much
else
for
gets
having
to
me
use
on.
the protocol for
Absolute
their own
pleasure.
use and utility.
Charles,
And
so
what's
much to
so cool
discuss,
is you
but
can have
before
a
we get into
merging
it,
of
the
two
most
worlds.
important question
So
from
they
the
say,
crypto
what creates use and
community:
adoption?
are you Satoshi?
Would you like 10 million new customers?
No,
who were
first
under
off,
the
you'd
age
have to
of
think
30,
like I
who
would
are
have been
highly
20 years
digitized,
old,
with rapidly growing
I'm a
income,
bright guy,
who have no
but
brand
I'm by no
preferences.
means capable
Of
at
course.
20 of
So,
conceiving
okay, come on board, build
a massive
applications for that
decentralized
and so forth.
ecosystem,
So
inventing
this
new
is the beautiful thing
protocols,
where
especially
we
since
each
I
get
didn't study
to
computer science
touch the
professionally. I
elephant
studied
in a different
mathematics,
way, and
they're a
maybe
world
somebody gets
apart.
the tail and somebody gets the tusk.
like pen and paper.
I am looking at it from one particular
most
mission and
likely
viewpoint,
candidate for
but to solve
Satoshi is
that, I've
probably
abstracted it and built a generic framework.
I'd argue that
and
if
I
you
believe
really
what
are
we've curious to
constructed
find
can
Satoshi,
satisfy the demands
you
of
can
billions
actually
of people.
make a lot of
And as a
progress with
consequence,
something
I also
called
code
stellometry.
Well,
So
in the long term,
stellometry,
the most
is
competitive
a term
for
analyzing
writing.
cases.
And
Because you know what?
usually you
Whether
do it for handwriting.
you build
but
a
can
fair
actually do it
election
for
system in
code.
Senegal,
and it turns out
or you
that
build a fair election
programming,
system in America,
it's the
the
same
actual
problem.
computer code that you
And
write
if I
is
can make
much
it
like
work
for some of the
fingerprint,
poorest
it's very
people in the
unique to
world,
the individual. It
and
has
bring them a
very
better
little
election
to do
system than the
with,
one we have in the
you know,
United
other
States.
stuff.
So
Why don't
if
we
you're
go to
really
the
curious
US
about
with
who
it?
Satoshi
After
is,
we've
you
demonstrated that it works
all of the
there.
original Bitcoin
That's how you
source
really
code,
get real
run it through a
growth and adoption
stellometric
and
analysis
change,
and get it
compare
at
to
training
training
set
set
of
of all
that
the open
we
source
didn't think were
projects around
possible
that time
before.
period.
And that's really what I'm
5-10
on.
years
I don't think too
before.
much about
and I guarantee
the day-to-day
you'll
of
probably
Polkadot
narrow
versus
that set of
Ethereum
candidates
versus this.
down to
Because you know it used to be
a very
EOS and
small
Tezos.
set.
I'd
And
say
flip the
5 or
page,
10
it's going to be
people that are
Avalanche and
likely.
F2 next
And then
year.
there's also
it'll
some
be
facts and
something else. It'll
circumstances
be
about the
Bot
protocol
point,
itself,
and
like
okay.
use of Forth.
What really matters
as the scripting
is,
language for
do you have
Bitcoin
laser
script.
focus on the
That was a
vision,
very
the
common
market, and the
pedagogical
problems
language
you want
in
to
the
solve?
1980s and 1990s.
And are you willing to take
in
the
the
risk
UK
to be there?
education
We've been in
system for
Ethiopia
undergraduates
for 3
as
years.
an example.
We've invested millions of
programming
dollars
language.
into this strategy.
So
and
you'd say, okay, the
physically
person
live
is
in these
probably
jurisdictions.
at the time
and they
the
fight
creation of
hard
Bitcoin
every
in their
day.
40s
and
or
they get a lot of
50s,
no's and a lot of
probably come
disappointments,
from
and
the
they deal with a lot of
cypherpunk
craziness.
movement.
My
They
director of
probably
African
were
operations
educated
was
in
once
a
arrested
UK
at the airport for the
system,
crime
that
of
could be
carrying
Australia or
too much
the-
money
or
out of the
England.
country.
You know,
He
these
had,
types of things.
because you have to pay everybody in cash. You get a lot of bear, the local
then you
currency
can
of
look at your
Ethiopia.
set of
He
candidates.
was just
and I'd
about
say
to
the
fly
most
back to
likely of
London,
that set would
and they
be,
searched him at the
Adam
airport,
Back.
and they tried
Well,
to say that he was
a lot of people do actually
evading
want to
capital
know who it is,
controls and
but in the
exporting
same
bear.
spirit, I guess
And I was
many
like,
people don't want to
I don't think
intrude on
anybody's
the
trying to take your
anonymity
money
of
and
it.
bring
Like,
it to
there's a
England.
reason
Okay,
why he kept it
this
to
guy's
himself,
half English,
or
half
didn't
Ethiopian.
want
He
to
was
go
visiting his
public. So
family in
in
London.
many instances,
So he had
I
to get a
asked the
pardon
question as a
from
joke,
the
but
from
we
the
do
Prime
wonder. But we can
Minister,
sort of see after the global financial crisis
I
of
mean,
2008,
talk about
Bitcoin bought the
difficulty of
concept
doing
of a
business. Most people
distributed
complained
ledger.
that
Then we had
their
Ethereum, which
flight
you worked
came
on,
in
which
early
brought
and
the
they had to
concept
wait
of
at the
smart
hotel for a while
contracts.
for their hotel
Moving
room
on
to
to
be
Cardano,
to be
how does
open.
that build
This
upon
is
the
literally
previous
like you're
generation
getting
to move
arrested
this
at the
space
airport
forward?
for carrying.
Yeah, so every generation
cash
you kind of
with
learn
you.
something.
The country,
And so for a long
cash
time,
of the
people were
country.
chasing
Could you imagine
decentralized
having
money,
like
and
$3
we were all
grand in
looking for that
US
smart
dollars in
cow
your
that would
pocket
open
and
the
then
gate,
leaving
let us all
America and they
out.
arrest you at
And
JFK?
Bitcoin
A
has
similar thing
but
happened
there were a
with
lot of
David
planners.
Hay,
I
an
mean,
Australian
Bitcoin
crypto
started in
commentator. His
1980,
focuses on
you know,
Venezuela.
and
His
there were a lot
wife
of
is from
cypherpunk
Venezuela,
ideas
and
there.
he was
And
trying to
in the
leave
90s,
Venezuela
it was
with
DigiCash, and
bags of
a
cash,
lot of
but
great
that bags
pioneering
of
work
local
from Hal
currency was
Finney
only
and
equal
David
to
Chaum.
about, I think, about
And
$100
then
US
in
dollars,
the
but
early
because it was worth
2000s,
so
you had
little,
work from
and he was arrested at the
people
airport,
like
and what they were
Nixabo
looking
and so
for
forth,
was
and there was kind
not,
of
in
like this
fact,
big
the
gold
local currency.
concept
They were
that was
looking for
floating
US
around.
dollars in those
So
piles of
the
cash,
synthesis
because
of all
they
those
thought that he was
concepts
actually
into
pulling
Bitcoin
US dollars
was just
hidden
a
within the
miracle
local
of
currency.
inspiration. A very simple
So
system.
what was really ironic
And
with that
for
is
its
that
time, it solved
they
a
weren't actually
great
too concerned
problem.
about their
You know, how
money
do you
leaving
create
the country. They were
decentralized
worried about
value
US
and move
dollars
that
leaving the
around,
country.
like
But
email?
I must admit,
The
Charles,
problem is
what
the
you
minute
say is very
that you
inspiring
validate
to
a
me, and
concept,
it sings the same
just like
tune
the
as
minute you
Andreas
create the web
Antonopoulos
browser,
speaks to
people
us.
complain
So
about it being
I think
blind, deaf,
one of
and
the most
dumb. And they say,
inspirational
"Oh
people in in the crypto space
We
for
want
me is
more
Andreas,
functionality.
because
So the
he
minute
never
you have
shows
the
a growing.
browser,
He's never
you're
selling a
searching for
product, but he
JavaScript.
speaks
You're
pretty
searching
much what you
for
were just saying
some
about
language
banking the
that will
unbanked,
enable
getting more
you to
people
have
into
richer experiences.
the financial
and then
world.
once you do
People
that, you
who
go from
can't
static
get a bank
websites to
account because
Amazon
they're not
and
even allowed to
Facebook and
walk into the
YouTube,
bank
right?
branch
So
itself.
similarly,
Don't worry
the
about
minute that
not
you have
having the
Bitcoin, you
documentation
need
to
smart
open a bank
contracts.
account.
You
He
need
goes into the
Ethereum.
fact that some
So
people
we
don't have the right
created
shoes
Ethereum.
to walk into a
And
bank
then the minute you have
branch to
Ethereum,
open that bank
people
account.
say, wow,
And
this is a
I
great
think this
idea.
is where a lot
We
of
want to do
passion
this
for
at
many
scale.
people who
We
go
want to do
beyond,
this with
buying a
billions of people
Lambo, who
instead
go
of
beyond
thousands
the
of people. And a
technology of
replicated
crypto,
system
but
can't
to
do
the
that. So
actual
you need new
real life
protocols for that.
opportunities it
And then you
creates
say,
for
wait a minute,
humans
the
around the
system has to
world.
talk to
Banking
everything.
the
Could you
unbanked.
imagine
And
how
for those who are
terrible
already
Wi-Fi
banked,
would
breaking
be
a away from corrupt systems. I guess this is a good segue into DeFi. When it comes to Cardano's ability to store identity on chain
it would be
to help
untenable.
DeFi into the mainstream, how do you deal with identity around DeFi using Cardano smart contracts?
Like your value,
yeah,
your
that's a good
identity.
question. So,
Like
first, Andreas is
flow
interesting
between the
guy.
8,000
he's
plus
Greek,
cryptocurrencies,
and
the
part of being an older Greek is,
and then finally,
how do you govern a system with
the country
millions of
lottery?
people
You
and
have
no
this
centralized
incredible
company?
country. We don't
that has this amazing history and legacy.
Like to think,
but everything is
we can
decline.
usually
There's
for Windows, you have
everywhere.
Microsoft.
For
Android,
so you look at the
Google.
Parthenon.
For Apple,
you imagine
for iPhone, you have an
Apple.
great building.
Well, what happens when you remove
looking
the
up at the
Apple,
Acropolis?
when you remove the
It's
Google,
like, wow.
the Microsoft?
But
how do you make
no
decisions
longer.
and move forward?
And so you're constantly reminded
Bitcoin
of
is
the
a
good
miracle.
old days.
It's also a
and then
failure.
You have this.
It's a miracle that it introduced
pessimism
concept.
that's
It's
kind
a failure
of
in that
bathed the
it
entire
can't
country
evolve.
where no one
So
pays
it knows
taxes,
it needs smart
everybody's
contracts. That
cynical,
system
and everybody
knows
hates
that
the
it would
government.
be
They're always
better to
trying
bring
to
in more sophisticated
screw you and
crypto
so
and
forth.
enhance
And we have a lot of
things
Greeks
to
in the
make it more
company. We have a
competitive
lab at University
with all
of
these
Athens.
emerging
My chief
standards,
scientist is
but
Greek.
there's no way to
And
create
what's
enough
so sad is
consensus
like the
to
most
be able
prominent
to
Greeks
evolve
don't
the
live in
system.
Greece.
And then all of
There's
these different
different
diaspora
fighting
each other.
leagues.
So there's a
And they
lack
go
of
somewhere else for
sustainability and
opportunity.
governance there.
So it's no
Furthermore, there's a
coincidence that
funding
one of the most
problem. There's a
prominent
tragedy of the
educators and
commons
voices in
problem,
the
where we all
cryptocurrency
agree it's
space happens
necessary
to come from that
infrastructure,
environment.
but there's
Because
no
I'd imagine
provisions
for him
made to
it's
subsidize
very
the
deeply
development.
personal.
So what ends up
He's
happening
seen
is you have
firsthand the
patrons
corruption.
that
He's
show
seen
up,
firsthand the
and they
bias.
exert
He's seen
enormous
firsthand the
influence
inequalities
over the
that
evolution
occur.
control of
And
the
he says,
system.
wow, we finally
for example,
have
the block
something
streams and the
that
DCI
can
and
inoculate
these other bodies
society
and groups,
to all of
whether they're
these
for-profit
evils
or
and
not-for-profit.
make it better.
And we see already
as for not shilling coins,
where
you know,
Google
you have
has
to admire
enormous
that
influence over
because
web
he could
standards
have
because
many
it's the
times
golden
throughout his
rule.
career
He who has
and
the
literally
makes the
made
rules. And
tens,
suddenly
if not
the
hundreds,
W3C
of
is
millions
talking
of
about
dollars.
injecting ads.
Instead, he
into your
spent his
browser and
time
other things as
writing
a
mastering
Bitcoin.
Bitcoin. He
Where
spent
did this
his
come
time
from? Well,
educating
Google kind
and
of
doing
wanted it.
lectures and
So
carrying the torch.
these are the three problems that we
and
kind
a
of
lot
said
of
we
people
need
don't
to
give enough
solve as
credit
a
for that.
consequence
So
of the
I think
success
Andreas
of
is a great
Ethereum
guy
and
and
Bitcoin.
definitely
And the
force for
problem is
good
the
in
problems grow
cryptocurrency
up
space
in
for all the years I've known him.
exponential complexity.
Now, in terms of
there's a
identity, to your
combinatorial
specific
explosion of
question,
things that can
we have
go
a framework
wrong.
called
Satoshi
Prism,
didn't create
and
Bitcoin one of the things
as
we
a simple
closely
system
looked at is what John
because
Clippinger did.
you know,
the
he
whole
couldn't come up
self-sovereign
with
identity
a more
movement.
sophisticated
And
system.
what happened
He created
with
Bitcoin
the
as a simple
development of
system
the
because the
DID,
more
from
complexity you
Menu
introduce,
Sporny
the
and
more that can
his
go
cohorts
wrong.
at the W3C.
For example, and
the minute you create
what's occurring
rich
is we're having a
smart contract
renaissance
language, you have a
in
DAO
identity
hack,
representation
you have a parity
and
hack,
attestation.
you have ring of
as well as
gadget style
portability and
situations
storage.
where you have
So
malfeasant
the
smart
DIF, the Digital
contracts
Identity
that cause all
Foundation, has
kinds of
more than
chicanery
30
and
members,
havoc.
including Microsoft
And the minute that
and
your
our
system
company,
grows,
and we're all
many,
talking
many
about
users, you
open
have the problems
standards,
of scale,
where you have a portable
and then you have
identity
to start introducing all
that's
of these
almost
really
like
complex
a URL to
layer
a
2
web
protocols,
page, you know, because you have a URL
off-chain infrastructure to hold up
an
the
HTML
system and
document.
pretend like it's
We have a
decentralized
DID,
when
and
in
a DID
reality
document.
it's not.
So the DID
So
tells you
that's
where
the
it's
big
at
challenge
and
for us.
gives you a unique
Cardano is a
identifier, almost like a
significantly
domain
more
name.
advanced product.
And then your document is
Who
who are you?
protocol
And you can put any
than
assets you
Ethereum,
want.
and
Put
Ethereum is
cryptographic
significantly
credentials.
more
You can put
advanced than
metadata
Bitcoin.
like your height,
And
your age,
dealing
medical
with this
history, whatever
complexity
it
at
have
times
you.
is
What
just
the
been
W3C
bewildering.
has done, the standards body, one of the
I have on
standards
my channel
bodies
with
of the internet,
Cardano
is
versus
created
Ethereum
exhaustive
is the advantage
specification
of
for DID.
Cardano.
So what we did is
I
we
seek
took
your
that
opinion on
spec,
this. So the advantage of Cardano
as has
versus
Microsoft
Ethereum
for
is
their
that
system,
Ethereum
and
has
like 10
launched
other
quickly.
identity
They've
systems that
created
are
a product,
emerging from
and
sovereign
now it's
to
almost
others,
like they're trying
and
to
we
clean
all
up
are
all
now
the issues
interoperable
that they
with each
have
other. And
that
what we can do
Cardano
is
is
we can use a
addressing before
blockchain
they're
to store
launching.
DIDs.
It's
We can use a
almost like
blockchain
the
to
analogy
help
that
with
I
the
give on my
revocation
channel is that
process and other such things.
Cardano is
So the
coming
Prism
in, making
framework
sure that the foundation
and its
is
companion
completely
mirror
rock solid. All the
deals
plumbing is in
with the
place.
issuance of DIDs,
All the
the
electrical lines
revocation
are
of
in, all the
DIDs,
clearances
and
are
the
in
mirror
before
framework
they
deals
actually
with
build the
KYC
house.
and
Where in
AML.
contrast,
The KYC component
Ethereum
of
sort of built
knowing
the house
who
before
people
trying to get
are.
all those
And so you can
foundations in
validate
place, and now they've got a
then
bigger
it's a very
challenge with
interesting
trying to clear
question
that up.
of how
Is that a
do you
fair
embed
analogy?
that into a
And if not,
workable
why is
cryptocurrency
Cardano
system.
going to be, in
So
your
you have
opinion, so
all
much more
these things that
successful than
require
Ethereum?
identity. Stateful operators
one of the things
require
about
identity.
wisdom is
You have that you tend to
apps
invent the
require
safety
identity.
belt
So
after
it's
you
not just
invent the
human
car,
beings, it's
and you
companies
don't
and
just
concepts
proactively
and
say, "Hey, it's a
machines.
good idea to
They
put a
require
safety
unique
belt." And what
identifiers
happens is you
inside
get in
the
a car
system.
accident government. You go through
the same
windshield.
situation with
You're
wallets.
like, boy, we should
There's
do
the
something
FATF
about
travel
that.
rule. There's
So
also the
Ethereum and
Treasury
Bitcoin
Department
were much
systems,
smaller systems,
regulations
and
that
much
recently
smaller
came out, and
economy
FinCEN
when
saying
they
we
came
want
out.
identity
So there was no
connected to
value at
wallets.
risk. We raised
So how do you
$18
do
million
all that?
for
So you create a
Ethereum. We were like,
cryptographic
wow,
credential. It
if
did.
we can get to $100 million cryptocurrency and get a few thousand people building cool stuff, and then you give the user the ability
to
and now it's a $130 billion ecosystem.
To
So
their identity.
there's a
And then what you
fundamental
do is you create
difference
privacy
between
by
where it
design
began
in
to
that
where
type
it's
of
at.
system.
And
So you create an
similarly, when you
aliasing
build the
system so you can
car
do
or the first
one-off
airplane, you're
identities,
not thinking at
and
all
they
about
can be
safety.
known
You're not
to
thinking
certain
at all
actors,
about
but other
these
actors they can't be
success
linked back to
factors
your main
that
identity.
come
You
the
introduce
consequences of
zero-knowledge
success that come.
cryptography, so you can do
Well,
threshold
if you build a
proofs where
car
you prove
today, you don't have the ability
like you're a member
to
of
just
a
pretend
set,
like history
for
doesn't
example,
exist. So
I'm
you have
an
to do things
American
differently.
or I'm over the
So
age of
the
21,
Teslas,
for example.
they had to adhere to all the safety standards
that
of
type of
Ford and
stuff.
GM and
And
these
then,
other things,
while
you
also
also
innovating and
other
bringing
things
new
like
things to market.
encrypting
So
identity.
we recognized very early on that
from
there
the
were a
outside,
lot of
everybody
issues with
would
consensus
just think
design,
it's noise,
especially if you
discern
plan on
what that
scaling
data happens to be
with proof of
However,
work
the people
in
with
the way that
encryption keys,
Bitcoin,
maybe the
and
regulator
Ethereum
or
using
the
it. So we needed a fundamentally different way of doing consensus,
ability
and
to
even
be
Vitalik
anonymized
agrees with that.
And
Which
the point is that
F2
you
exists,
put
and
the
they're trying to clean this
individual
stuff up.
in control.
But we went
of all
beyond
of
that.
That's
That's
the
entire
core
development
concept
paradigm
of how people build dApps.
So it's not
they
handed
write smart
to you.
contracts. This
It
type
doesn't
of stuff
come from the
it has
government.
To be,
It doesn't come from a
business.
first
It comes from
principles
you
basis, because
and
it
then
was
it's
never
your
built in a
decision
way
about
for
how much you wanna
sustainability.
save,
It was never
how
built in a
you
way
wanna
for resource
upgrade that,
predictability.
who you're going to get
Because
to
if I'm an
vouch for you.
application builder,
And then you
I'd
get a
like
whole
to have
bag of
predictable
tools to make that an
application
easy
costs.
process.
Could you imagine
And
a web
how much
host
you
who's
do
like,
is going to
well,
depend
maybe I'll
upon the
charge you
geography you happen to
$500
live
today
in.
for your app,
China,
and then tomorrow
for
maybe
example,
it'll
they
be
have social credit,
$5,000, and then the next day it'll be $5.
They're going to ask for a lot
It's like,
of
what kind of
information.
drugs are you on? This is not a
Switzerland
business.
and other places,
I need to have
they respect
predictable
privacy
cost if
much
I'm
more
going to be
so.
able to have a
And they have
predictable
strong
application, or else
regulations to keep
nothing
things
works.
as private as possible.
Well, Ethereum was never built for that.
You
It
have
built as an
much less
experiment that kind of
you start with a
into
framework that's
successful
proposable,
project, and now
and you allow
they're
people
trying
to build up their
build
profiles
a safer
accordingly.
car.
And then you know
this is
when
why
you enter
first
into a
mover
certain
advantage in
economy,
technology
you can either
in many
be more
cases
relaxed
is actually
or
a historic
stricter
disadvantage
about how you
the
apply
first web
your
browser was
identity
Mosaic, and it was
to
a
commercial
for its time
transactions.
revolutionary.
So with this
but
in
really
mind,
didn't do
do you think
much
there's
in
going
the
to be
long stream of things.
one
Even Netscape
blockchain to
failed,
rule
and
them
even
all,
Internet
or will it
Explorer
be an
failed, and now we're in the
interconnected
Chrome age, and
network of
maybe
blockchains
Brave will dethrone
facilitated
them.
by
Who knows?
something like
Well,
Chainlink
similarly,
or
search
Arc or something
engines,
that hasn't even been
like
created
Google,
yet?
I think, was the 17th
I think that we're going to have an
search engine
internet
to
of
become
blockchains
blockchains,
because
blockchains
blockchains
are
so there was
just
a lot of
a
failures
trust
before
engine,
Google,
and they're usually
there was a
contextual
monopoly
to a
before
domain.
Yahoo
And so
had
there's
a
the
huge
trust
chunk
engine
of
for
the market.
healthcare.
They
That
were
was
very powerful.
For example, there's a huge
MySpace
problem
had a
with
huge
portability
chunk
of
of
the
medical
market
records
before Facebook came.
We're starting
and
to
now
look at this
Facebook
with
is starting
vaccine
to
passports. How do you
deal
prove
with all
you've
these
been
emergent
vaccinated?
hellions that are
So what if
new
you have a
social networks that
vaccine
are scraping away at
certificate
it,
and you come from
so
Zimbabwe?
usually
Will
what happens
Switzerland
when you're
trust
the
that?
first
Will
mover
America
is
trust that?
you
How do
get a
we
lot
know
of
it's legitimate
population,
but it's
forged,
unstable,
and vice versa.
they're
How
very
does the Zimbabwean
frustrated
doctor
with
know
that
that you're
platform.
American?
And you're covered with lots of vaccine passports issued in the state of Wyoming by a local doctor,
and
as a consequence, you can't. It's like holding sand in your hand. It slips through your fingers, and it's really, really hard because what assurances would you get? And then all these other competitors come, and they have the benefit of hindsight, so they don't make the same mistakes you've made, and they also know where they need to
huge
innovate.
amount of discussion,
and because they don't have to deal with
meta
the legacy concerns you have,
database
they can
that's
move
blockchain
faster than you.
based for the
And as a
movement
consequence, they
of
get
medical
more
records
features
and
and
the verification
verification
of medical information.
So, for example,
common.
Ethereum had
COVID
been
is
working
kind
on
of
proof of
forced that
stake
upon the
a
world. And that's
year
just
longer
example.
than we have.
That is
with
not
Casper,
going to be the same database,
despite
the same
that we were
blockchain
first to market as
Bitcoin
our proof of stake protocol,
or
and they
Ethereum
probably
or
won't have
Cardano.
theirs
It's
fully
gonna be
turned on
special
until
purpose and
2022,
likely run by a
consortium of large
completely a
hackers.
consequence of
Now,
process and
it
scale.
might then be
and dealing
interconnected
with,
to
their
another
legacy
blockchain
concerns.
project like Cardano
I'm wondering
and use
if you're
it as a
comfortable
service
speaking
for
to us
certain
about
things.
it. Do you still
Like
speak
a
to
payment
Vitalik,
system
and
or
why
an
did you
identity
leave?
layer
Why did you two
or a
break up, per
computation
se?
layer to do
Well,
complex
I don't imagine
computations.
Vitalik has a super high opinion
And that's
of
the
me.
point of internet blockchain.
You know,
is that you now
and
start
it is
looking
what it
at
is.
each of these things.
The
as
reality is that
domain-specific,
we have very
consuming
big
other domains and
philosophical
services.
disagreements about
Another
how
example
things
would be
ought to
autonomous
run.
vehicles. When I was
that's
there,
a
I said, look,
horribly difficult
for
problem
taking
to
other
sort
people's
out
money,
because
you
you
have
have to
this
put that
issue of
money into
vehicle
a
to vehicle and
structure
vehicle
that
to
creates
infrastructure
accountability.
communication. And we have
Furthermore,
standards
we have
like
to put
802.11
key
key
founders
founders
and
and
keep
keep
them
them
loyal
loyal
to
but
the
there's
project,
dozens,
'cause
there's
too many
discussions
of them.
about
There's 8
that.
founders.
But the problem is
And
you
if they're
can't
not
trust
locked into
one
something,
vendor to be in
then
control
what's
of
going to happen is they're all
vehicle-to-vehicle
going to run away
communication.
and create their own
That's
ventures.
too powerful,
Which is
right?
what they did.
So how does
Anthony
GM
did
and Ford and
Decentralization,
Honda
Gavin
and
did
Toyota and
Polkadot
Tesla
and
and
did
BMW
Cardano,
and Mercedes-Benz
they all
and
there's
all these other
manufacturers.
manufacturers, how did they get along?
Furthermore, the
And how did they
incentives were
create an
set up
open
that
standard
we got
for
paid
their
up front
vehicles to
with a
talk to
founder
each other?
reward, which
Because
I
if you're
didn't
talking
take,
about
the other 7
self-driving
did.
cars, that's a requirement.
And
They have to be able to talk to
basically,
each
if the
other
project's
and to
successful,
infrastructure
hallelujah.
to
If it fails,
understand things
hallelujah.
that the
But you've already got your
onboard
maximum
systems
reward
forward up front, whereas in an equity finance model, like for example, 2 miles up ahead, there's a venture capital car crash or something accountable. So the first there was some fundamental disagreement, and the cars that happen to be up ahead could actually do that. And I felt, wait a minute, how can we avoid hackers with VC money to build the thing and manipulate the network and so forth? And then wow, there's a whole security layer, and there's this notion of trusted hardware that has to run it. That's a very different type of blockchain. That's one dimension. The other dimension is the medical record infrastructure. There, we had for 6 months is been living in local consensus. You know, in the Switzerland you don't have house, and he was traveling around the world, and communication was very siloed, and paranoia and fear started building up. And there's like 3 books now written about this, and those books, you know, they paint a portrait that there was a bunch of very brilliant people that got 2 doses of brains and half a dose of social skills, myself included. And when you put them into a high stress hippie-like situation, it breeds a lot of conspiracy theories and fear and these types of things. And frankly, there was just too many founders. So at some point you have to consolidate. And there was really 2 different paths that Vitalik could choose. He was sitting in the middle. He could pick the business side, which is what I was advocating, and Anthony DiOrio and Joe Lubin were advocating, or he could pick the tech, crypto anarchy, not-for-profit, egalitarian, meritocratic open source world, which is what Gavin and Jeff were pushing. And ultimately, our side lost. Amir Shatrit left, and I left at the same time. And then shortly thereafter, Anthony left, and then Joe went on to do Consensus and monetize a whole different area. And then obviously the tech people, it was Lord of the Flies. They ate themselves. They nearly spent all of the ICO money. They launched Ethereum. I think they had less than $500,000 in treasury of the original 18 million that they ran. And they got very lucky that Ethereum became very valuable very quickly. That allowed them to replenish the treasury, and now it's a success. But just like Tesla in 2008, they were damn near bankrupt. So, in hindsight, could we have found a more amicable way, or could I have done things very different? Of course. At the time I was 25, 26 years old. It was the first time I've ever done anything at a scale like that. There's a reason I became a mathematician and not an MBA. I don't have those native skills. It took me about a decade to slowly aggregate and learn how to lead a company and actually be accountable to a company and run a software project and run a science project. And, my work stands for itself. With IOHK, we've published 92 papers. I think over 10,000 citations. I mean, an academic career for, somebody who's been around for 40 years or 50 years. We did all of that in just a 4-year period from when we bootstrapped our scientific to actually getting serious about paper production. And then we built an engineering company that not only can deliver a product as complex as Cardano to market, but do it in a very exotic programming language, Haskell, find talent there, and then actually go and improve Haskell, the programming language itself, and compile it to JavaScript and to WebAssembly and so forth. So I have 6 years of history at IOHK, and I have 6 months of history at Ethereum. What's so disheartening is that Ethereum is the big project, and Cardano isn't quite there yet. So Ethereum is what everybody knows me for. And so they only had 6 months of data where I had limited ability to influence and control things. And I was just one brick in the wall amongst many. And then at IOG, I've been the CEO, the big guy, so I've had the ability at my company to demonstrate what a vision would look like. And a lot of people often ask, well, what would have happened with Ethereum had you stayed? So we've already run that experiment. It would look a lot like Cardano, so how we built Cardano, the approach we took, that's exactly what Ethereum would look like. And similarly, they ask, well, what would have happened to Ethereum had Gavin Wood had more say? Well, we already ran that experiment. We have Polkadot, and that's exactly what Ethereum would have looked like. It will look a lot more like Polkadot and less like F2 and so forth. So in many ways, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It allowed all of us, Gavin, myself, Vitalik, to be our own guys and to pursue our own visions and build our own communities. And I think the cryptocurrency space is much richer as a consequence, because all the things we've done are open source. So love us or hate us, the ideas are percolating and being shared, and we learn from them, they learn from us, and ultimately the communities all benefit in that respect.
I'm glad you mentioned the community, because a big mission for me is sometimes when there's, let's face it, sometimes there's some serious conflict within the crypto community saying this coin's better or that coin's better. And a message that I try to put forward is, well, we all progress forward. So if one coin's sort of going up and another coin's going up, not as fast, the entire crypto community is progressing, because in the bigger picture, I find in my world, I'm trying to sell crypto as a concept to those who are not in the crypto space at all. And then within the crypto community, you have this in-house fighting. When you mentioned Gavin and Polkadot, we now have the 3 big runners, arguably, Polkadot, Ethereum, and Cardano. Is there the space for these 3 to operate together, or in parallel, if you will, or will there only be one winner in this smart contract space? Will there only be Cardano or Polkadot or Ethereum, or will they all coexist?
Well, I've been in the space long enough to watch the top 10 on CoinMarketCap change a lot. I remember Feathercoin and Peercoin and Freycoin and Namecoin and these things. So stuff changes. The only constant is change. So, who knows if it's Polkadot, Ethereum, and Cardano. It does look like we're heading to a Mexican standoff, and, it's going to be a good, the bad, the ugly type of a deal. and we don't know which one's wearing a poncho. But we'll find out what happens. The market will decide that. But I think we have the wrong mentality when we look at things in a sum zero way. At the end of the day, we have to say, are we solving the problems we set out to solve? And there's two sets of them. One are conceptual, and then the other problems are actual. So the conceptual problems are convincing people that you can run governance, you can run systems in a fundamentally different way. Money is a great example of that. We say, okay, two options. You can have private money or public money. So either have a central bank that a government controls or a bank issues a currency. Both of these have screwed the pooch. There's been over 100 plus years of history in modern central banking, and in private banking, we've seen all the way back to the Rothschilds and their gold certificates. In all cases, they just don't work out well. Last year, we printed $6 trillion of money out of thin air to pay for stuff, and they have the audacity to say, I still have to pay taxes. Why? If you're telling me you can print $6 trillion and it's not going to have inflation, why don't you just do that every year and pay for everything? Why not just helicopter money in monetary theory? See, that's the logical inconsistency and the temptation of the printing press. And in private money, look at Tether or these other things. There's a lot of allegations flowing around that maybe they're a fractional reserve. And even if they're not, it's real tempting to be a private business and sit on $25 billion of cash and be like, well, nobody will really know if I take a little bit and maybe invest it in this or do it in that or something like that. That's what the Rothschilds did with their gold certificates. They say, hey, people aren't redeeming these at the rate of issuance, so we could go fractional. Nobody would even notice, and look how much money we'd make from that seniorage. Okay, so when you have those types of situations occur, maybe it's better to have a third option. And that's what Bitcoin basically did. It said, this is a deflationary money system, value system. It's like a proto-commodity. It's like digital gold that allows you to build money. And it's not run by a government. It's not run by a bank. It's something new. So that's the conceptual side of cryptocurrencies. And there's all kinds of concepts: voting, property rights, identity, okay, making decisions in a transnational way. And every time you demonstrate a killer use case like that, then everybody can point to it and say, I know that works. And that becomes a permanent social building block that you can use for a business. It's almost like when you're successful, they say, I want to be the Uber of X, the Tesla of Y, right? There's this concept that the business model works and we want to emulate or replicate this kind of idea. Then the actual is doing stuff. And so success for me in the space is saying, did we make a difference? How did we choose to spend our lives? So I look at the world system, and I did a TED Talk back in 2014. I've just said the same thing over and over and over again. And I'll keep saying it. Maybe one day it'll happen. We live in two worlds. We live in the developed world and the developing world. In the developing world, they're unbanked for the most part. And despite the fact that they're just as smart as us, they work harder than we do, and they're just as human as you and me, they are shafted because their systems are terrible. They live in capital controls and corrupt governments, and they live in areas where there's not good rule of law, and they don't have stable currencies. And as a consequence, no real good banking infrastructure, no good risk management infrastructure, and so forth. So they can't build wealth of no fault of their own. They lost the geographic lottery. They were just unlucky. Okay. So the point of our technology is to take a step back and say, why don't we just give them a new system? We talk about DeFi. Who's going to be using DeFi? The 25-year-old yield farming kid in New Jersey living in his mom and dad's basement? Or is it going to be the farmer in Ethiopia that's trying to get a fertilizer voucher and can actually, if he gets it, afford to repay you a 15% interest rate? It's going to be the farmer. You see, and that's what gets me up in the morning. And I don't really care if that infrastructure runs on Polkadot or Ethereum or Bitcoin. The reason I built Cardano was that I looked at all the infrastructures, I looked at their roadmap, and I realized they're trying to chase the wrong markets, they're dealing in the wrong ponds, and they're not going to really proactively go to that part of the world and help them out. So if we built Cardano the right way, it would be built in a way that would be maximally beneficial to as many people as possible. So yes, the IBMs can use us, and the Microsofts can use us, and the GMs can use us, and we can do supply chain and, all of these other things. Sure, but that's not the point. What I'm going to do is wake up and direct our commercial efforts, my company's commercial efforts, to Ethiopia and to the country of Georgia and to Southeast Asia and to Mongolia. But it's an open protocol. So as we do that, everybody else gets to use the protocol for their own use and utility. And what's so cool is you can have a merging of two worlds. So they say, well, it creates use and adoption. Would you like 10 million new customers who are under the age of 30, who are highly digitized, with rapidly growing income, who have no brand preferences? Well, of course. So, okay, come on board, build applications for that and so forth. So this is the beautiful thing where we each get to touch the elephant in a different way. And maybe somebody gets the tail and somebody gets the tusk. I am looking at it from one particular mission and viewpoint, but to solve that, I've abstracted it and built a generic framework. And I believe what we've constructed can satisfy the demands of billions of people. And as a consequence, I also believe what we've built will, in the long term, be the most competitive platform for all of these use cases. Because you know what? Whether you build a fair election system in Senegal or you build a fair election system in America, it's the same problem. And if I can make it work for some of the poorest people in the world and bring them a better election system than the one we have in the United States, why don't we go to the US with it after we've demonstrated that it works there? That's how you really get real growth and adoption and change and get it at scales and levels that we didn't think were possible before. And that's really what I'm focused on. I don't think too much about the day-to-day of Polkadot versus Ethereum versus this, because, you know, it used to be EOS and Tezos. And flip the page, it's going to be Avalanche and F2 next year. And then it'll be something else. It'll be Bobcoin, you know, and okay. What really matters is, do you have laser focus on the vision, the market, and the problems you want to solve? And are you willing to take the risk to be there? We've been in Ethiopia for 3 years. We've invested millions of dollars into this strategy. And we have people physically live in these jurisdictions, and they fight hard every day. And they get a lot of no's and a lot of disappointments, and they deal with a lot of craziness. My director of African operations was once arrested at the airport for the crime of carrying too much money out of the country. He had, because you have to pay everybody in cash. He had a lot of bear, the local currency of Ethiopia, and he was just about to fly back to London. And they searched him at the airport, and they tried to say that he was evading capital controls and exporting bear. And I was like, I don't think anybody's trying to take your money and bring it to England. Okay, this guy's half English, half Ethiopian. He was visiting his family in London, so he had to get a pardon from the prime minister for it. I mean, talk about difficulty of doing business. Most people complained that, you know, their flight came in early and they had to wait at the hotel for a while for their hotel room to be to be open. This is literally like you're getting arrested at the airport for carrying cash with you, the cash of the country with you. Could you imagine having like $3,000 in US dollars in your pocket and then leaving America and they arrest you at JFK? Crazy.
A similar thing happened with David Hay, an Australian crypto commentator. His focus is on Venezuela. His wife is from Venezuela, and he was trying to leave Venezuela with bags of cash, but that bags of local currency was only equal to about 100 US dollars, but because it was worth so little. And he was arrested at the airport, and what they were looking for was not, in fact, the local currency. They were looking for US dollars in those piles of cash because they thought that he was actually pulling US dollars hidden within the local currency.
Right.
So what was really ironic with that is that they weren't actually too concerned about their money leaving the country. They were worried about US dollars leaving the country. Right. But I must admit, Charles, what you say is very inspiring to me. And it sings the same tune as Andreas Antonopoulos speaks to us. So I think one of the most inspirational people in the crypto space for me is Andreas, because he never shills a coin. He's never selling a product, but he speaks pretty much what you were just saying about banking the unbanked, getting more people into the financial world, people who can't get a bank account because they're not even allowed to walk into the bank branch itself. Don't worry about not having the documentation to open a bank account. He goes into the fact that some people don't have the right shoes to walk into a bank branch to open that bank account. And I think this is where a lot of passion for many people who go beyond, buying a Lambo, who go beyond the technology of crypto, but to the actual real life opportunities it creates for humans around the world, banking the unbanked. And for those who are already banked, breaking away from corrupt systems. I guess this is a good segue into DeFi. When it comes to Cardano's ability to store identity on chain to help DeFi into the mainstream, how do you deal with identity around DeFi using Cardano's smart contracts?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, first, Andreas is an interesting guy. I mean, he's Greek, and, part of being an older Greek is, they didn't win the country lottery. I mean, you have this incredible country that has this amazing history and legacy, but everything is in decline. There's ruins everywhere. And so you look at the Parthenon, you imagine, wow, that was a great building. looking up at the Acropolis. It's like, wow, but it's no longer. And so you're constantly reminded of the good old days. And then you have this Greek pessimism that's kind of bathed the entire country, where no one pays taxes, everybody's cynical, and everybody hates the government. They're always trying to screw you and so forth. And we have a lot of Greeks in the company. We have a lab at University of Athens. My chief scientist is Greek. And what's so sad is, like, the most prominent Greeks don't live in Greece. There's the diaspora. They leave and they go somewhere else for opportunity. So it's no coincidence that one of the most prominent educators and voices in the cryptocurrency space happens to come from that environment, because I'd imagine for him, it's very deeply personal. He's seen firsthand the corruption. He's seen firsthand the bias. He's seen firsthand the inequalities that have occurred. And he says, wow, we finally have something that can inoculate society to all of these evils and make it better. As for not shilling coins, you have to admire that, because he could have many, many times throughout his career and literally made tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. Instead, he spent his time mastering Bitcoin. And he spent his time educating and doing lectures and carrying the torch. And a lot of people don't give him enough credit for that. So I think Andreas a great guy and a definitely force for good in the cryptocurrency space for all the years I've known him. Now, in terms of identity, to your specific question, we have a framework called PRISM. And one of the things we closely looked at is what John Klippinger did with the whole self-sovereign identity movement, and what happened with the development of the DID from Manu Sporny and his cohorts at the W3C. And what's occurring is we're having a renaissance in identity representation and attestation, as well as portability and storage. So the DIF, the Digital Identity Foundation, has more than 30 members, including Microsoft and our company. And we're all talking about open standards, where you have a portable identity that's almost like a URL to a web page, because you have a URL that leads you to an HTML document. We have a DID and a DID document. So the DID tells you where it's at and gives you a unique identifier, almost like a domain name. And then your document is, who are you? And you can put any assets you want. You can put cryptographic credentials. You can put metadata like your height, your age, medical history, whatever it have you. And what the W3C has done, the standards body, one of the standards bodies of the internet, is created an exhaustive specification for a DID. So what we did is we took that spec, as has Microsoft for their system, and there's like 10 other identity systems that are emerging from sovereign to others, and we all are now interoperable with each other. And what we can do is we can use a blockchain to store DIDs. We can use a blockchain to help with the revocation process and other such things. So the PRISM framework and its companion Mirror deals with the issuance of DIDs, the revocation of DIDs, and the Mirror framework deals with KYC and AML, the KYC component of knowing who people are, so you can validate these things. Then it's a very interesting question of how do you embed that into a workable cryptocurrency system. So you have all these things that require identity. Stake pool operators require identity. You have apps require identity. So it's not just human beings, it's companies and concepts and machines. They require unique identifiers inside of a system. The same situation with wallets. There's the FATF travel rule. There's also the Treasury Department regulations that recently came out, and FinCEN saying we want identity connected to wallets. So how do you do all of that? So you create a cryptographic credential, a DID, you embed it into Daedalus, you embed it into your cryptocurrency, and then you give the user the ability to decide what they want to attach to their identity. And then what you do is you create privacy by design in that type of a system. So you create an aliasing system so you can have one-off identities, and they can be known to certain actors, but other actors, they can't be linked back to your main identity. You introduce zero-knowledge cryptography, so you can do threshold proofs where you prove properties, like you're a member of a set. For example, I'm an American, or I'm over the age of 21 for drinking in America, huzzah, that type of stuff. And then you also introduce other things like encrypting identity. So from the outside, everybody would just think it's noise. They can't discern what that data happens to be. However, the people with the decryption keys, maybe the regulator or the regulated business you're doing business with, has the ability to de-anonymize that. And the point is that you put the individual in control of all of that. That's the core concept of self-sovereign identity. So it's not handed to you. It doesn't come from the government. It doesn't come from a business. It comes from you. And then it's your decision about how much you want to say, how you want to upgrade that, who you're going to get to vouch for you. And then you get a whole bag of tools to make that an easy process. And how much you do is going to depend upon the geography you happen to live in. China, for example, they have social credit and they're very draconian about things. They're going to ask for a lot of information. Switzerland and other places, they respect privacy much more so. And they have strong regulations to keep things as private as possible. So you have much less information. You start with a framework that's composable and you allow people to build up their profiles accordingly. And then when you enter into a certain economy, you can either be more relaxed or stricter about how you apply your identity to commercial transactions.
So with this in mind, do you think there's going to be one blockchain to rule them all, or will it be an interconnected network of blockchains facilitated by something like Chainlink or Arc or something that hasn't even been created yet?
I think that we're going to have an internet of blockchains because blockchains are just a trust engine and they're usually contextual to a domain. And so there's the trust engine for healthcare. For example, there's a huge problem of portability of medical records. We're starting to look at this with vaccine passports. How do you prove you've been vaccinated? So what if you have a vaccine certificate and you come from Zimbabwe? Will Switzerland trust that? Will America trust that? How do we know it's legitimate and has been forged? And vice versa. How does the Zimbabwean doctor know that your American vaccine passport issued in the state of Wyoming by a local doctor is actually legitimate, right? Unless they see your medical records. How do you even show them that? And why would you do that? Because what assurances would you get that your records will be kept confidential when they cross country lines and they enter under different privacy standards for different countries? So there's a huge amount of discussion about a meta database that's blockchain based for the movement of medical records and the verification of medical information for the commons. COVID has kind of forced that upon the world. And that's just an example. That is not going to be the same database, the same blockchain as Bitcoin or Ethereum or Cardano. It's going to be special purpose and likely run by a consortium of large actors. Now, it might then be interconnected to another blockchain project like Cardano and use it as a service for certain things, like a payment system or an identity layer or a computation layer to do complex computations. Okay. And that's the point of an internet of blockchain, is that you now start looking at each of these things as domain specific, consuming other domains and services. Another example would be autonomous vehicles. Okay, that's a horribly difficult problem to sort out because you have this issue of vehicle to vehicle and vehicle to infrastructure communication. And we have standards like 802.11p Wi-Fi, for example, but there's dozens of discussions about that. But the problem is you can't trust one vendor to be in control of vehicle to vehicle communication. That's too powerful, right? So how does GM and Ford and Honda and Toyota and Tesla and BMW and Mercedes-Benz and all these other manufacturers, how do they get along? And how do they create an open standard for their vehicles to talk to each other? Because if you're talking about self-driving cars, that's a requirement. They have to be able to talk to each other and to infrastructure to understand things that the onboard systems can't interpret themselves. Like, for example, 2 miles up ahead, there's a car crash or something like that. Be nice if something tells your car that, and the cars that happen to be up ahead could actually do that. But wait a minute, how can we avoid hackers from breaking into this thing and manipulating the network and so forth? Wow, there's a whole security layer, and there's this notion of trusted hardware that has to fit in. That's a very different type of blockchain infrastructure than the medical record infrastructure. There, latency is king and local consensus is king. You don't have time to go to some protocol, wait 10 minutes for a block to confirm. Whereas in the medical record system, doesn't matter if you have to wait an extra 5 seconds or 10 seconds for that permission to come through to the doctor or the hospital that you're at. Probably not. It's not going to make any difference. But there, 5 to 10 seconds can be life or death with a vehicle driving or a drone in the sky or something like that. So there's no way one architecture, one design, one system can handle all of these different problems. But all of these problems have value. They have people. They have information. So interoperability is super important. The ability to move value, information, and people between these different systems is really what matters. So the connecting tissue, the internet of blockchains, that connects all of them together is really what matters as an industry. Just like Wi-Fi, everybody has a take on how to do Wi-Fi. ASUS has their router and Netgear has their router and so forth. But there are standards that they follow to guarantee interoperability, and we can move between them, and everybody has their particular flavor. They say our version of Wi-Fi 6E is so much better than their version because we have this special beamforming antenna. And similarly, our blockchain is much better for IoT for vehicles than your blockchain, and that's great. But I, as a consumer, are going to be moving between these systems. I'll be sitting in the self-driving car, and then I'm going to go visit the doctor and have that record. And then I'm going to want to pay for lunch. So I need to use the payment processing blockchain that processes billions of payments per day, all different demands. So I believe there's going to be an internet, and there's going to be thousands, if not millions of these things floating around.
One of those demands that certainly excites me in particular with relation to medical is a logistical supply control. So not to speak of a certain coin, but it's just one coin that I think is doing quite well and is VeChain
Right.
Thor. Controlling this logistical supply system. Like, how do I know the medicine that I'm about to take is legitimate? How do I know this aircraft part that I'm about to put in this state-of-the-art piece of machinery that's carrying 200 people across the Pacific Ocean? How do I know that this aircraft part is legitimately what it claims to be? And this is where I see the power of blockchain actually saving lives, beyond the banking power, beyond making sure the medical records are up to date. Another one is baby formula. A big issue that we have in Australia at the moment is there's a massive run on baby formula where many Chinese locals, if you will, are buying a lot of baby formula and sending it straight back to China because there's no guarantee that the baby formula in that country is legitimate. And babies are literally dying because they're eating formula that is not real. But when it comes to Cardano facilitating the interconnected network of blockchains, do you play a part of that? And if so, how?
So that's one of the pillars of a third generation cryptocurrency is the cryptocurrency's ability to communicate with things that aren't itself. So you need sidechain protocols, you need Oracle protocols, and so forth. And the frustration is it's not a technological problem as much as it is a business problem. Seldom do interoperability standards get selected by technical merit. There's a reason Wi-Fi is Wi-Fi and Bluetooth is Bluetooth and so forth. And it has very little to do with the fact that they happen to be the best available protocol on market. It's entirely possible that there are other protocols that just for whatever reason end up becoming the standard. Like the lingua franca of the internet's JavaScript. If we got a do-over, we would have done that a lot differently than JavaScript because it was just such a bad language, but it just caught on and we just had to deal with it, right? So standards, they sometimes get set in mysterious ways. The duty of Cardano is to bring some scientific rigor to the conversation and some adult conversations about history. So go build your standards within Hyperledger, within the W3C, within the IETF, within the bodies that really make a lot of sense to do that, and do the science to know what fundamental capabilities. So we've systemized a lot of knowledge about cross-chain communication, about oracles, about sidechain protocols. Like we invented the NEPA-PALs, for example. Okay. And as a consequence, we kind of know what you can and cannot do when you're moving value, information, and people between systems. And then begins the standards wars, where we and other systems come in and we talk a lot about how do we do that in a sensible way. And maybe we win, maybe we don't win. But if we don't win, what we do is we adopt that standard, whatever the market standard happens to be. And then begins the service-oriented era of blockchains. So you mentioned VeChain, for example. They're killing it in supply chains in certain respects. Great. But there are certain things that system just doesn't do. So maybe the VeChain guys, when you write a VeChain application, could then use Cardano for certain parts of that application and another blockchain for other parts of that application or something like that. Like, for example, let's say Avalanche hits market and it's very strong. It's great for IoT. So maybe you're talking about a supply chain that is bathed in lots of sensors. So you run the IoT part with Avalanche, you run the supply chain part with VeChain, and then you have value moving between the systems. So you issue the token on Cardano. There you go. You see, so now you have three different systems and the systems are all working together. And if you have a DEX, you can actually pay all the fees with the underlying unit of account of each system. And then there's a resource question. And you might even have a shortest path algorithm and use multiple blockchains. And whichever one is the cheapest of the day, that's the service you're thinking. So it's almost like load balancing on servers amongst different types of cloud infrastructure. That's the market we'll move to. And these interoperability protocols will allow us to do that with safety and low latency and reliability. It'll take about 3 to 5 years, I think, for the industry to get to that point. So what Cardano's contributing is we're working with the standards bodies, we're working in the academy, and we're taking a very rigorous approach, and we're trying to get an understanding of theoretical capabilities of what can you do and what you can't do. Like if you can't do it, when I say that, I say we have an impossibility theorem. We've actually proven it's not possible. There's an attack that it can exist or something like that. And if you can do it, what are the trade-offs? And those are usually time, settlement time, transaction cost, transaction complexity, the introduction of a trusted third party or something like that. We're trying to really understand what that design space looks like. But the problem is maximalism is the enemy of interoperability. And so this maximalist viewpoint that people have is retarding, it's slowing down the progress of interoperability protocols. So it's really important that we take a step back and we just try to be very dispassionate, take our tokens out of the equation, and focus on what's good for the consumer and what's good for the overall industry, which is how do we build these different protocols in the maximally beneficial way for all actors, even if it at times adds some hindrances to our particular protocols.
When I run my own thought experiments in the land of crypto, I think about Google. So if you look at Google as an example, first when internet was developing, you had Hotmail that was kind of, or AOL, they were the kind of like the main email. And then you had navigation, which individual units that you were sold on navigation. And then you had different applications that were all different companies in themselves. And then they all kind of merged, if you will, onto one platform, which was Google, which kind of did it all and knocked a lot of businesses out of the water.
Right.
I guess what I was wondering is, could that in fact, in the long term, happen with crypto? Could there be a Google of crypto? And some argue, when I've had this discussion in the crypto community, that in fact Cardano is poised, if there were to be such a thing, Cardano would be poised to be the Google of crypto.
Yeah, so you have to understand the difference between the protocol and the on-ramp and the interface to the protocol. And the beautiful thing about crypto is that crypto separates these really elegantly. The tech world has not. So social media is the canonical example of this. When you look at Facebook, for example, they control the information protocol. So they control where the river goes and how the river flows. And they also control the website that you use to access that river and share the information with your friends and family. If they were separated, deplatforming wouldn't be an issue. Because, for example, Parler versus Twitter, you would use the same underlying protocol between the two, and Parler and Twitter would just be different interfaces to that. And they couldn't be deplatformed, right? And so they have different curation standards, different communities, but they could coexist, and nobody could shut Parler out of that underlying protocol. So as long as you build your infrastructure this way, then you don't have to worry so much about these Googles or these Facebooks or these Microsofts, because they're just value adding. What they're doing is building these great ecosystems, delivering great experiences. But if they dislike you, they can't use their market position to punish you and prevent you from using the underlying infrastructure, whether that be the app store or the payment layer or your ability to connect with people and communicate with people and so forth. So we look to Cardano in this way. We say, okay, well, Cardano is an identity system. It's a payment system. It's a computation system. It's a democracy engine because it has Catalyst, so you can hold votes, not just for Cardano, but eventually dApps will use Catalyst as governance as a service. And then they can build their whole government around those voting stacks and hold votes and so forth. No one can shut you out of any of that. Once you're in, whether Charles Hoskinson likes you or not, whether IOG likes you or not, you're in, okay? And you can do whatever you want there. Now, whether you're successful, you can build a network effect, you can build a viable business. That depends a lot on whether people like you, the content of your character, the things you say, the relationships you have, and so forth. So obviously there are some best practices to consider there, but that's if you wish to be successful, but you can't be shut out of these things. So I don't think of it more like, am I the Google or not, or should we pursue Google or not, or is Cardano the Google or not? I think of it more of how do we separate things in layers so we can have our cake and eat it too. We can maximize fairness and equality and prevent deplatforming through collusion and corruption and monopolies or political inconvenience. But at the same time, we can still create a competitive free market where the best ideas can win, and they don't get to use the fact that they have one to shut out future competitors, which is what we typically see in these types of markets.
I see this as a bit of a dichotomy of Bitcoin. I recently released a mini documentary on Bitcoin, and I spoke about the biggest threats to Bitcoin. The third point I raised in that was the power that it takes away from government. So you raised the Parler Twitter example. To me, that's really concerning. I thought we were in a democracy, and I thought freedom of speech was apparent. Evidently, that may not be the case, because if someone's saying something that a company doesn't like, we can silence that person. And then if another company comes to market and say, well, you can use our platform, the big company can say, well, we're going to disband in that platform entirely, which was hugely alarming to me. So in one sense, when it comes to this dichotomy, you've got crypto is loved by the people because it enables everyone to have an equal voice, equal access, equal spread of information, whether information be to your medical records, tweeting something out into the Twitter sphere or whatever it will be in the future, sending an email or sending money. But then you've got the other side. Governments lose a lot of control when we introduce crypto, whether that be through the power of money, creating money, fractional reserve lending,
Right.
a quantitative easing, all the tools around money, or the distribution of information. Do you think that, is it possible that governments could in fact be a threat to cryptocurrencies in the future?
Governments are made up of the people. And this is the thing, is people, one of the greatest sins, I think, that violated what the American experiment was trying to give the world was this view that the government is different from us and it's the enemy, and we have to protect ourselves from the government. The whole John Locke notion of things is it's a public trust, and we're the beneficiary of that. The government is a trustor. They're given special powers and funding, but the point is that they're trying to create social good. So what we need to do is, stop being so conspiratorial and cynical in viewing the government as this monolithic power machine that's just there to screw us, and instead say, okay, how do we use this technology to transform our governments, transform the way we elect our leaders, transform the way information is reported, transform auditing and transparency and accountability, transform government services, and so forth. And then what happens is you eat them alive through those systematic transformations. And those who are corrupt, they have a smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller place to hide. And then the other thing is it becomes indefensible, because they're basically saying, oh, we have to stop this stuff. And everything, wait, you have to stop the system that's going to give us fair voting? You have to stop the system that forces you to be transparent? And if you're in a democratic system, ideally you elect people, right? So if people are consistently doing that, you just have to make sure you have a memory and you're good at running political campaigns. And in a few cycles, you can get rid of those people, and you really can change things. I was part of the Ron Paul movement, and that was a real tough thing because we lost and we won. So we lost 2 presidential campaigns, and we lost the audit, the Fed, and all of these other things. And it was so disheartening because so many people supported us, and so many people would say, well, this is just common sense. On the other hand, we got a senator elected, Rand Paul. We created a Liberty Caucus. And now that's permanently part of the American political conversation. Every single year, we now have people saying, maybe all these wars, we shouldn't have them. Maybe we should have sound money. Maybe we should get rid of the spy state. We weren't having those conversations at that level, with that level of legitimacy 10 years ago. So the movement made some progress as a consequence of that initial impulse. What blockchain does is it allows you not only to make that progress, but when you make progress, you've permanently replaced a government utility. And after you've done that, it's really hard to get the cat back into the bag. You can't, nobody can argue to regress it to the old system. They're like, well, yeah, I understand this blockchain voting system is working out and it's much faster and it's provably secure and it's fraud free, but let's go back to paper ballots. We really should do that. It's like, no. It's like saying, hey, we know this internet thing is great, but we should really go back to paper newspapers. Come on, let's go do that. It's like, you can't put that cat.
It's a brilliant point. I don't know why we wouldn't use blockchain technology in voting. It's so transparent, immutable, open source. Do you think the next election in the United States will be run on the blockchain?
No, and there's very good reasons right now not to. There's a great paper that was written by one of the pioneers in cryptography, Ron Rivest, and his colleagues at MIT, and they actually explain the hazards of a digital voting system. There are huge challenges to building an auditable, transparent, and fair digital voting system, and that's the problem. And so, this technology in concept is very easy to sell, and we saw that with the internet. In the early 90s, like the true pioneers of the internet, they said, guys, this thing is going to change everything, and they were right. And the problem was they were also wrong when they said right now. it took 30 years for us to actually see the rise of all these internet empires, and they're still imperfect and there are a lot of problems. So timing happens to be the problem. I see the future, and I believe before I die, we will have blockchain-based voting systems that are trusted and secure. I don't believe that that's going to happen tomorrow, and I do believe it's going to require an enormous amount of effort to get them installed. And it'll be just like Bitcoin, where it's kind of like not really popular, not really popular, not really. And then finally you have some bellwether moments, and then suddenly, vroom, it goes way up. So it'll be the same situation. Same for legalization of marijuana in the United States. It's all illegal. And then every now and then you see some cracks forming, and now it's inevitable that all 50 states marijuana will be legal. So it's the same movement. Gay marriage was another example of that. For the longest time, it's nothing, and then suddenly it's legal in all 50 states. So we'll get there, but it might take 10 years, it may take 20 years, and we're going to have a couple of really great case studies where it clearly works. People have tried to attack it, and it just somehow defeated that, and it moved on. Just like Bitcoin has really changed the monetary policy conversation. It's taken 12 years to be an overnight success. And it'll take 12 more years for them to actually have a real impact on monetary policy of nation states. The first nation to adopt the cryptocurrency, for example, as its sovereign currency and treat it like the euro, in which they don't actually control the central bank, but rather it has a decentralized monetary policy, that'll be a weird event. But within a century, it could end up becoming the thing that creates a world reserve currency that no one controls, and it de-dollarizes the dollar.
Yeah, I think a digital payment method is, well, we're already there. We already use digital money, but it's just, do we want to use digital fiat or digital crypto? And as we see China release the DCEP, I think it stands for the Digital Currency Electronic Payment.
Right.
It appears that they might be rushing for their crypto to be the world currency. And then there's argument about the gold standard coming back. And then you have cryptos linked to gold, and then you have the digital gold of Bitcoin. And I think you raised a good point about timing. Will this stuff work? Yes. Will it work tomorrow? Well, it's the same. The good analogy that you gave was the internet. But when we look at Goguen as an example, going back to Cardano, so Goggen's your focus for the launch in February, but beyond Goguen, let's say in 5 to 10 years, where do you see Cardano being used most?
Well, I'd hope we'd have 100 million or 200 million, perhaps more African users, and lots in Eastern Europe and lots in Southeast Asia. And it's the day-to-day platform for a financial operating system. Your land registration's on it. You're getting loans on it. You're communicating with your friends and family with it. You're doing payments with it. You're securitizing your business with it and raising money with it. You're running your country's stock market on it. You're running your national elections on it. I would love to see Cardano do that within 5 or 10 years. And I actually think it's possible, especially for countries that are in the market for new systems, where they're actively trying to change. With Georgia, for example, the way we structured everything, it's very likely that within the next 5 years, every university diploma in that country issued will by default be verified and validated by the Cardano blockchain. So every one of those students, that's normal for them. And then we can extend that to the national payment system, the track and tracing of tourism, 1,000 different things, tax collection. That can be normal for them. And it's really not that hard once your foot is in the door to start adding layers to that system. So I think we have a real good shot for Cardano to provide that. And what's nice is you have natural utility and demand then. You'll have organically, as a consequence of these systems, billions of transactions every single day. And the way the economics are built in Cardano, that creates sustainability, because you no longer need inflation to compensate the stake pool operators or the treasury system. The transaction fees alone will be valuable enough to actually cover the day-to-day operations of the system. So you have built in a growth engine that will continue paying VC to grow the system and continue capturing markets. And then you have another positive feedback loop that pays for more and more competition to run more and more infrastructure to make the system more decentralized. And with Hydra and other technology we've been investing in, we're going from a replicated to distributed system. So as we add more competition, instead of just getting more security, you also get more scale. So that's the magic of the protocols we've had. We figured out a way to get demand through public-private partnerships and getting these new governments on board. And that demand will generate organically billions of dollars of value, which translates to sustainability and growth of the system. And so we have a positive feedback loop that'll just keep going and going and going. And then we're wired into the academies. So we have a decentralized brain. Regardless of what happens to me, you have hundreds of scientists all around the world waking up every day, working full-time for Cardano. and writing protocols for Cardano. So you have all these young, renewable, faceless minds. Doesn't matter where they're from. They can be Mongolia, or they can be Eritrea, they can be, America, writing protocols. And so you're always innovating, and you're innovating at a scale that no other company can innovate at, no other, blockchain can innovate at. So we'll always have a scientific and protocol advantage, especially as we deal with more and more complex problems over every other system. That's my hope.
The example of that you gave there with the degrees is fantastic. I was listening to a podcast just yesterday, actually, about buying a degree. You could get Masters of Businesses in certain Middle East states for $120. And there was no real way of certifying it. And some of the stamps on these degrees, they were amazing. They seem to be the original stamp. But of course, bring in the blockchain and you can't, these things fraudulent. So I think you've got a fantastic real life case study there that as soon as you do that, I cannot see any reason why other universities wouldn't adopt that as a certification of their degrees.
Right. And then you get 2 or 3 countries, you get inter-country agreements, you get Georgia, maybe then Italy or Greece, and then suddenly it becomes a European standard. Then the whole EU ratifies it within 5 or 10 years, and you're the de facto infrastructure. So even though it's an open standard, you'll capture 80% of the market. It's the same for CBDCs, so China's doing one, so America's got to do one, and they got to get a little bit more friendly with crypto regulation, but then they'll create standards for CBDCs, and then every central bank will want to do it. And then what you do is you say, hey guys, we're the settlement layer. Get rid of BIS. 2/3 of these banks are non-BIS members anyway. So just come deploy on our system and use us as a settlement system. And we'll be the best deployer of that particular standard. So even though Tezos will probably have one and Algorand will have one and so forth, we'll get 8 for every one that they get. And that alone creates billions of transactions every week in volume. So these are the kinds of things that I'm very excited about. We've been building and building and building for so long. And now to actually go out there into the arena and commercialize is just so much fun. And the fact that we have this built-in venture capital engine with Catalyst that creates hundreds of millions of dollars to go and collect these deals and bring them into the ecosystem and to encourage in a very egalitarian way. We had people in Africa who got funded with Fund 2. It's so incredible to see that, a small scale fund is able to have so much reach, and it'll turn from dozens to hundreds to thousands of projects every 6 to 8 weeks is incredible too, because they bring their networks, their families, their friends into the system, and then they personalize it. So it's not Cardano Charles Hoskinson edition, it's Cardano, John Smith edition. And, so that's a really powerful thing because it's now their protocol and they've found their own seat at the table.
I wanted to say congratulations on your successful Fund 2 Catalyst vote. Just on that, for those who haven't heard about it, what is Project Catalyst and how can people get involved for future funds?
Yeah, so we're building a whole stack of voting into Cardano, and we're partnered with a lot of great companies and think tanks. For example, we're partnered with an innovation management company called IdeaScale. They've been around for almost a decade. They work with Pfizer and Boeing. So you ask how did Pfizer come up with that vaccine so quickly? They use IdeaScale. So we basically brought them in along with some decentralized tooling, and we created a whole new voting system. We spent 4 years researching how to do a private blockchain-based voting system out of Lancaster University that can scale to lots of users. And basically what we've been doing is systematically launching funds. So the treasury of Cardano takes some of the inflation that normally you'd give to stake pool operators or miners, and it gives it to a decentralized account. And then people submit ballots to get funded. And then over time, people can vet those ballots and it goes through a process like a gauntlet. And if they survive, they can vote. And if enough votes come in, you get funded. So Fund 2 was the first time we did this in an open process for everybody. Anyone who holds data can participate. And we had over 5,000 community members show up, participate, very aggressive dialogue. And it was only $250,000. Despite that, they put in probably collectively 10,000, 100,000 hours of time into debates, discussions, and poor Dor, the product manager for that, he didn't sleep at all for a while. And then what happened was we approved, the community approved collectively 11 projects. So, and we just published all the voting results. And what's going to happen is every 6 to 8 weeks, we're going to launch a fund. Cardano's going to launch a fund, and they're going to grow. So they'll go from $250,000 to $1 million to larger amounts. And what means more and more people will participate. And eventually a majority of ADA holders will be able to participate and vote right in their wallet, right in Daedalus, or right in Yoroi, or through community-built interfaces and so forth. And we already have a cell phone app we've constructed that works on both iPhone and also on Android. So Catalyst is really cool, and there's a dedicated website for it. But eventually, within just a few months, you'll be able to participate in Catalyst directly through Daedalus itself in a voting center that's built right into the default wallet.
It's really inspirational, Charles. If I may, I'd also like to commend your team. So in the background, I've coordinated a lot of interviews. I've worked with a lot of cryptocurrency creators, but really your team seems quite inspirational. They're very motivated. They're very kind, particularly if I may mention Pierce, Rachel, and Michael, all very professional, very nice. And I think that team behind you speaks volumes for the leadership that you're providing, the concept of the coin, where it's going. So, thank you and your team for everything that you're doing in the big picture. Before we close off, I'd like to go into a rapid round with you.
Sure.
So I'm going to mention a word or two, and I would like you to respond in less than 5 words. 1 word is also acceptable, and you may pass on any one. And then just for a warning for everyone out there, I will be asking for a price prediction, but we'll get to that one last. Okay, rapid round. Here we go. Tether.
Insolvent.
XRP.
Probably a security